Hey friends, welcome to Shigaraki. So today we are going to see, what if Deku was raised by retired heroes? So before we start, check out my Patreon page for 18+ exclusive mature content. We will now proceed to the video. His lungs hurt, they hurt a lot. Izuku's mother had once told him that this feeling was called burning, but all he could focus on was trying to find help. Earlier his mother had said that they needed to run out to the store to get something, and since it was so close to dinner time, she had promised that they could eat out, that Izuku could get Katsudon. But then while they were walking to the store, Izuku had noticed a man hunched over in one of the passing alleyways. He had asked his mother if they could check on the man to see if he was alright. He regretted it now. Hey kid. When they got to him, his mother had tried to reach out and ask to see if the man was hurt, but before the words could even leave her mouth, his body just seemed to melt and gush as it turned to liquid and surged forward towards her. Inko had pushed Izuku out of the way, screaming for him to run while she struggled against the man made out of slime. With scraped knees from the fall, he ran, faster than he had ever run before. He was sure of it, to find someone to help, to find a hero. The few people on the street didn't seem to hear what he was crying about. Simply thinking he had lost his mother and that she would hear his cries and find him, or that a hero would help the poor child, but being ignored just seemed to make Izuku cry harder, making it harder for him too. Goddammit it kid. The feeling of fabric wrap around his wrists and waist broke him from his daze as he was lifted into the air and came face to face with a rugged-looking man in yellow goggles. Izuku knew what the man's name was. He was sure that he had seen him, if only in short snippets in the news, but he couldn't remember his name, the panic in his system making it harder to focus on that detail. But he didn't care if he remembered his name. He remembered this man was a pro-hero, just what Izuku's mother needed. Aizawa had just started his shift half an hour ago, watching the streets of the smaller part of the city. Usually there wasn't as much activity there, but it still needed to be watched over. Sighing, he cracked his neck and gazed down from one of the rooftops. Though he had taken a nap before his shift, he was still felt slightly tired, probably from dealing with Yamada being loud or his bullshit in general. The sound of crying caught his attention, and he turned to look down the street opposite of him to see a child with messy dark green hair, probably no more than 5 or 6, running frantically down the street. Dragging a hand down his face, he called out to the kid, but after the second time the brat didn't respond. He decided to literally grab the child's attention. Jumping down from the roof, Aizawa used his capture gear to grab the child in front of him, who had stilled the moment it had wrapped around him. It was obvious the kid was distressed, if it wasn't the tear-stained cheeks and flushed face that gave it away. The rapid fire of words that came out in a panicked and fearful voice was definitely the next big giveaway. Setting the kid down and releasing his hold over the child, Aizawa placed his hand on his shoulder to steady him. "All right kid, I'm going to need you to slow down what you just said so that I can understand you, got it?" Apparently the kid understood what he was told but was still too panicked to actually slow down. But he did manage to make out the words, "slime villain, mother, and hurting her. Shit, alright, not another brat who got separated from their parents." Hoisting the kid up into his arms, Aizawa used his capture gear to make sure he was secure before asking him if he could remember where his mother and the slime villain. After receiving a frantic nod, the kid that was now clinging to him began to point and also yank, which really did nothing considering Aizawa was holding him, in the direction of his mother. Rushing down the street and mumbling out short move S and excuse me, S. The kid's grip tightened as they got closer to the alleyway. He tried contacting Yamada and a few other people before he got there. If the villain was who he was thinking of, then he wasn't sure if he could actually fight and defeat the villain by himself. Stopping just before the alley, Aizawa set the kid down and kneeled in front of him, telling him not to move from that spot before bolting into the alleyway. The sight that greeted him was a giant mass of sludge that seemed to completely surround a woman, presumably the boy's mother. Aizawa remembered the villain from a report a few days ago. It mentioned that the sludge villain was resistant to physical attacks while in liquid form. That combined with the fact that the villain's quirk was definitely a physical type meant both his attacks and his quirk was useless against him. The sludge villain seemed confused at his presence, obviously not recognizing him, but laughed when he seemed to realize Aizawa must have been some hero. Aizawa froze as he tried to figure out some way to help Boy's mother before trying to surround the villain using his capture gear. Like hell he was just going to stand around and wait for the others to get there. Pulling onto the cloth, it began to sink through the villain until it got caught on something, presumably the mother, or at least he hoped it was the mother. Gritting his teeth and tightening his grip, Aizawa yanked the woman out of the sludge villain and surged forward to grab her before she could hit the ground. "Crap, you're stronger than you look, huh, Scarf Boy?" The V. Elaine growled out. "I bet you'd last longer than that useless invisibility cloak." It made to move towards Aizawa but stopped when another voice spoke up. Hey now, you don't want him." Present Mike stepped into the alley with confidence and ease, not even showing the fact that he had ran the whole way there. Eraserhead over there is a real grouch, not exactly the nicest person to steal a body from, EY. The sludge villain seemed taken back by the man's entrance. "Oh. And you would be a better one." Shrugging, Mike grinned up at the villain. "Definitely, more pizzazz and an amazing voice too." I wouldn't want to upset my listeners with a disappearance, so I can't really let that happen. Ratings would go down and all. As the sludge villain seemed like it was about to surge forward, Mike too. Okay, a deep breath and let out an ungodly loud shout, just before Aizawa managed to cover his ears and shield the woman he was holding. As the sludge villain smacked against the wall behind it, disoriented from both the impact and the noise. Mike pushed up his shades and let out a triumphant laugh, another wonderful show for the listeners. "Goddamn that pretentious ass." Glaring at Mike, Aizawa was out to responded when he caught sight of the kid peeking out behind the corner. Before he could even tell the boy to wait, he was running forward, straight past Mike and towards him and his mother. Aizawa was about to let the boy reunite with his mother when he noticed that shit no. He reached out to stop the boy but it was too late. Barreling forward into the pro-hero and his mother, Izuku sobbed in relief as he grabbed onto her. "Mom. I was so worried. I ran as fast as Mom." She wasn't responding to him, she was just laying there, eyes lidded and mouth slightly open, and she just wasn't responding. A new wave of panic swept over him as Izuku tired to shake his mother, trying to wake her up. Mom, it's okay now. The heroes came. Kid." Izuku looked back at the hero he had found. Now remembering he was the hero Eraserhead. The man looked lost as he reached out towards him, but Izuku griped tighter to his mother, refusing to let go. "Mom's just tired, right? She'll be fine after she sees the doctor, right?" Quote. Eraserhead head looked pained at his words and turned to look at present Mike, who looked just as lost as him, but when Izuku looked at him he turned away, unable to look at the boy. Aizawa could see the realization in the boy's face and pulled him forward into a hug just as he began to sob again. His entire body shook with each gasp. The crowd that was starting to gather adding only more stress. Tightening his hug with the boy and slowly running his fingers through the fluffy green mess, Aizawa tried to calm him down, shushing him and telling the boy it would be alright. Even though he knew it was a lie and just made his stomach turn with guilt. Mike bit his lip before looking back at Aizawa. "The police should be here soon. I'll make sure the crowd doesn't get too close." Nodding, Aizawa pulled the boy up with him as he stood, moving away from the body of the boy's mother. When he had first pulled her out, he didn't notice that she wasn't even breathing anymore. That the sludge villain had probably suffocated her before he had even gotten there. Now he was holding onto her sobbing son, unsure of what to do to make the situation better, unsure of how to help the boy clinging to him with a death grip as he let out sobs that shook both of them to their cores. Aizawa sat quietly as he held onto the hand of the young boy sitting next to him while he was examined by the doctor. The kid had managed to stutter out that his name was Midoriya Izuku after an hour of Aizawa trying to calm him down. It didn't last long though, because when an officer came to take Izuku from Aizawa, he was thrown back into a fit of panic and began to sob harder into his shoulder. After another failed attempt by the paramedics to get Izuku to let go of him, so that they could take the boy to the hospital, Yamada had offered to cover the rest of his shift so that Aizawa himself could take Izuku there without causing any more stress to the child. Now Izuku just remained silent at his side, gripping his hand tightly, mess of curls falling into his face, hiding his eye as the doctor applied bandages to his knees. Aizawa was sure the only reason the boy wasn't crying now was because he cried so hard earlier that he probably didn't have anything left in him. Still hanging onto Izuku's hand, Aizawa leaned back and rubbed the bridge of his nose with his other hand as he sighed. An officer had come into the room earlier, saying the boy had a father overseas but they weren't able to reach him. Until then Izuku would have to stay somewhere, usually. They would suggest the hospital since the doctors were still worried about him being in shock, or a foster home, but seeing as how he had attached himself to Aizawa, the officer asked if that could be an option. No one doubting his ability to take care of the child. If the father continued to ignore contact, Izuku would most likely be put into foster care. Honestly, with the fact that Izuku didn't seem to know his father at all. Minimal knowledge which Aizawa guessed was from Izuku's mother, seemed to signal that the father left before the kid was born and never visited, making him doubt wet. Her Izuku's father was even a good option at all. A parent that didn't seem to have intentions of associating himself with his kid from the beginning didn't seem like the type of person to turn around and start helping with said kid now. But there were laws that gave biological parents rights that Aizawa didn't think some of them deserved. All right. He should be good to go. The doctor ruffled Izuku's hair as he stood, double-checking his paperwork before handing a few sheets to Aizawa while guiding them to the waiting room. He's still in a little bit of shock and has a few scrapes, but other than that he's all good. I would recommend at one point taking him to a psychologist to make sure he's alright mentally, but I'll leave that to whoever becomes his guardian, his father or someone in foster care. If something happens during the week he's with you, don't be afraid to contact us, but hopefully that won't be needed. Have a good day. The doctor gave one last thumbs up towards Izuku and a nod to Aizawa before turning back to one of the nurses. Aizawa's gaze lingered on the doctor before turning to look down at Izuku, still clutching his hand like a lifeline. He honestly cool. Didn't figure out why Izuku latched onto him. Yamada was far more friendly in both personality and looks. So were some of the cops that arrived later, but Izuku had decided the underground hero was the one he wanted to hang onto. A tap on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts and he turned to see Nimori smiling sadly at him. Yamada told me what happened. The police went to the apartment and I brought a few things for the kid. I figured you wouldn't want to take him just yet. Seeing that Izuku had looked up at her, Nimori kneeled and offered her hand with a sweet smile. Hey there little guy, I'm Midnight, how you doing? Both the heroes looked at Izuku expectantly, but all Izuku managed was a whimper before hiding behind Aizawa's leg. Nimori jerked her hand back in surprise and glanced up at Aizawa worriedly. Unfortunately Izuku doesn't seem to want to interact with anyone, he sighed as he hesitantly patted Izuku's head in comfort. The doctor was okay after a little while, but other than that. Nodding, Nimori pushed herself back up, setting a hand on Aizawa's shoulder. There's a car outside. Black sedan with tinted windows, it has all of his stuff in it. I figured since you don't have one it might make things easier. I'll handle anything else that needs to be done here, you get the little youth some rest. Holding a hand up to stop Aizawa from interrupting, she took the keys and placed them in his hands, no buts. You need rest too. Patting his shoulder, Nimori left him with Izuku. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Aizawa looked down at Izuku before lifting him up and carrying him on his hip. We're going to go to my house now, alright. Izuku didn't have a response, other than to shove his face into Aizawa's shoulder, but he took that as a yes and made his way out of the hospital. The last few days had been tiring to say the least. When they had gotten back to his apartment, Aizawa had given Izuku his things and shown him a guest room that would have been used for storage if he had owned more things. His apartment had been furnished before he moved in, so he already had a spare bed waiting. He left Izuku alone so that he could change into his pajamas while Aizawa made something for the kid to eat, but when he got to the room, a plate of warm rice and some eggs in one hand, Izuku was sitting curled up next to his bag. Aizawa had set the food down on the side table next to the bed before sitting down next to Izuku and watching him. He had felt guilty about not knowing how to comfort the kid. Sure, he had worked with children before, usually runaways or who had just gotten lost and needed to find their parent again, but nothing like this. After a few minutes, Aizawa got up again and told Izuku to eat however much he could and then to get some rest while Aizawa finished some paperwork. Leaving the door slightly open so that he could hear if something was wrong, like Izuku crying again. He came back an hour later to see some of the food had been eaten, but Izuku was still awake. Figuring that he just didn't want to be alone, Aizawa had gotten his laptop before getting Izuku ready for bed. Once he was tucked in, Aizawa had told him to go to SLE while he finished his work in the room. 20 minutes later Izuku was asleep and Aizawa took the things out into the kitchen to clean up, but when he went back to check on Izuku half an hour later the kid was awake and sniffling again. The first 3 days were almost a cycle. Izuku would eat the minimal amount and then get the minimal amount of sleep with some tears mixed in. At first he called Aizawa, Eraserhead-san. To which his first response was, please don't, but he later managed to convince Izuku to at least call him Aizawa-san. He would watch the news in the living room if Aizawa was there, but other than that, Izuku would stay in the next room over. Every now and then he would stop drawing on the paper he had given him to glance from behind the door frame to make sure Aizawa was still there. It went downhill on the 4th day when he took Izuku back to his old apartment so that Izuku could pack a few things, and Izuku had ended up crying the whole day when he caught sight of a picture of his mother. To make matters worse, Izuku seemed to blame himself over his mother's death, sobbing out that it was his fault because he had insisted on seeing if that man was alright, that it was his fault for being quirkless. When Aizawa managed to calm him down and explained that his mother's death was in no way Izuku's fault, he had carried Izuku and helped him pack as he was too much of a mess to do it himself. Honestly, at that point he was glad his agency had decided to give him the week off. After that, Izuku started to follow him around, sitting beside Aizawa's leg on the ground if he was working, writing in his notebook, or playing with one of the toys Aizawa had packed. Whenever Yamada came by with food, Izuku would cling to his pant leg the entire time, answering with a meek voice when spoken to. But every now and then during the time he stayed with Aizawa, Izuku would break the mask he had and show what Aizawa guessed was the normal Izuku. If they saw a hero fight on the TV, Izuku would go off on a small tangent on the hero's quirk and tactics, or he would be proud of a certain drawing or note he had made and show it to Aizawa. But it only lasted for a few minutes at most before Izuku seemed to catch himself and revert back to the silent, sad boy. He still wasn't sleeping well, less than 5 hours a night, which was still concerning. Now on the day, he would have to turn Izuku over to the foster care, because his shitty father was still ignoring them, so the system had decided that it was the best option. Aizawa was sitting back on his couch, Izuku finally asleep in his lap as he did some of the work Yamada had given him the night before. He didn't want to admit it, but the kid was growing on him. The little pieces of the boy that came through just captured his attention. Izuku was definitely smart, the small bursts when he got excited proving it, and polite as well as having an all-around kind nature. Plus he wasn't nearly as annoying as most brats his age. The fact that he was quirkless also pulled on his heartstrings, Aizawa knowing fully how cruel other children could be, as well as some adults. When Izuku had mumbled about being quirkless to him, he could see the shame rolling of Izuku, most likely caused by bullying he undoubtedly faced. Being quirkless could also mean that Izuku probably wouldn't be adopted as quickly as Brat with some flashy quirk. Running his hand over Izuku's curls, Aizawa glanced up at the clock and let out an annoyed sigh. Izuku had only been asleep for an hour and he'd already have to wake the kid up. Granted it was 1 in the afternoon, he still thought the kid deserved more sleep. He could probably afford a few more minutes since they had packed his things earlier. Aizawa ran his hand over his face before he gently nudged Izuku awake. When the boy blinked tiredly up at him, he hesitated before telling Izuku it was time to go, not missing the flash of fear and disappointment on Izuku's face. The drive to the foster care center was silent, Aizawa glancing over at Izuku whenever he could only to see him playing with the hem of his shirt. When they got there Izuku had gripped his hand and with white knuckles as they walked into the building. A young lady with purple skin greeted them with a sweet smile and offered her hand to Izuku, which he promptly ignored in favor of gripping Aizawa's hand tighter. Goddamn kid was making this hard. When it came time for Izuku to go with her, Izuku had hesitated before he shot forward and wrapped his arms around one of Aizawa's legs. A muffled "Goodbye Ai-sama" was heard, but it took him a moment to realize Izuku wasn't mispronouncing his name. Huffing, Aizawa got down and ruffled Izuku's hair. "That's cute kid, but still too formal," tapping first lightly against Izuku's chest and waiting till he looked up at him. Aizawa gave Izuku a small smile. "Don't be a problem, alright brat." Izuku blinked before nodding and giving Aizawa a watery smile. Pulling him into one last hug, Izuku took the socials worker's hand and followed her through the door. The last thing Aizawa saw was Izuku's face drop the moment he thought he was out of view. "Oi Shota, have you heard anything I just said?" Aizawa grunted as he rubbed the back of his neck where the pebble hit him. "No, but you should be used to me not paying attention to your screaming by now." "You're not paying attention to anything," Mike sighed and leaned back against the wall behind him, still worried about little Izuku. Glaring at Mike, Aizawa gave no response before turning back to watch the people walking in the streets below them. "You know you could always number. But does your quirk come with a mute button?" Throwing his arms in the air in frustration, Mike began to pout and turn away from the man on the ledge. "I can't believe you say I'm the annoying one. All I've been trying to say is that it's pretty obvious you've been distracted since you let the little listener go off into foster care. And you've also been hinting at something else, considering I found that adoption form in my mail yesterday." Aizawa swears if they have this argument again he's going to throw Yamada off the roof. He may have been distracted since he took Izuku to the center almost 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't as big of a concern as Yamada, or Nimori for that matter, was presenting it to be. He had told both of them that taking Izuku in was not the best idea. Being a hero took time and it also meant he could get hurt on the job, and Aizawa was not about to put more stress on that kid. When it remained quiet for longer than 5 minutes, Aizawa thought he had finally dropped the subject until Yamada once again opened his mouth. "You said he looked sad when you left." Aizawa paused at that. "I don't think he'd mind staying with you either, judging by the way he clung to you. Plus if you decided to take him in, you work night shift most of the time, so you could still be there in the day for him. And if you couldn't get a babysitter I wouldn't mind watching him. Midnight probably wouldn't mind either. She was talking about how cute he was the other day. I'm pretty sure your paycheck could cover both of you easily too." Slowly, Aizawa turned his gaze from the street to Yamada, who still had that ugly pout on his face. "You do realize that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, right?" "While that is true, I just have one more thing to add." Aizawa scoffed. "You always have something to add." "Fine, what is it?" "I'm the one who's supposed to be full of shit and you're the one who's supposed to be smart." Turning back to the street, Aizawa rubbed his temples. Goddamn Yamada for actually being reasonable for once. "I swear to God, if Izuku grows up and has issues because of shitty parenting, I'm going to kick your ass." Letting out a cheer of victory, Yamada flopped onto Aizawa. "Good to know you're still grouchy, logical old you. Also that bank 2 streets down is getting robbed and we should go stop it." "Never mind, he's kicking Yamada's ass right now." Izuku didn't expect 3 things. The first being that he didn't expect was for his father to come back for him. When Izuku was 4, he could remember when he heard his mother talking to Bakugos about an argument she had with him over the phone, that his father wanted to keep his distance from now on, but he was still willing to help pay for Izuku. He could remember Mitsuki-san slamming her hands down and shouting about what a fucking disgrace his father was and his mother telling her to calm down. Swearing like that when child were in the next room wasn't good. His mother didn't tell him that his father wasn't coming home and Izuku never asked. He had never met him before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. The second thing he didn't expect to happen was getting adopted. When the nice lady with purple skin had taken him to his foster parents' house, a couple that was currently taking care of 2 other foster kids, Izuku might not have been so sure, but after a few days, the other kids made sure he knew. It wasn't as bad on the first day. Izuku kept his distance and the other 2 seemed to respect that, but after the husband had mentioned Izuku was quirkless to his wife, causing her to become irritated with Izuku, they seemed to follow after her. It was almost like Kachan, who he hadn't seen in almost 3 weeks because the foster care system requested Izuku not go back to daycare until they were sure he was ready. When he would walk by they would shove him, and he tried talking to them, he was either ignored or told to go away, and they both seemed to make an effort to make sure Izuku knew he wasn't going anywhere, that no one wanted a quirkless child. The husband tried to get them to stop while the wife didn't seem to care. Finally, Izuku never expected to see Isama again. While he liked staying with Isama, he didn't want to bother him either. Izuku, you knew the life of a pro was bound to be busy and Isama seemed like a Very busy man. It was nice though, he didn't make Izuku talk about things, he waited until Izuku wanted to talk instead of pushing him, and if he cried, Ai-sama would hug him. His hugs were like his mom's. Izuku wasn't expecting any of those things, so when his foster father told him almost 2 weeks into staying with them, that someone wanted to see Izuku, he almost didn't believe it. When he said it was a man named Aizawa Shota, Izuku couldn't help being excited. He didn't care that the other 2 kids were mad at him and were more pushy than usual. All he cared about was seeing Ai-sama again. When Aizawa came by the next morning, Izuku had ran straight to him and started to cry as he pulled Izuku into a hug because Ai-sama was nice and funny and wasn't mean to him because he was quirkless. His foster mother had started to apologize for Izuku's behavior when Aizawa waved her off and explained the reason for his visit. Izuku didn't think he could have cried harder. Aizawa had started to sort out the paperwork with the adoption care a few days before. The same purple-skinned girl, Ryoko, sitting at the front desk greeted him when he entered the building. She didn't seem surprised to see him, the smile she gave seemed like she was expecting him. When he started the paperwork, Ryoko assured Aizawa that he could get Izuku as soon as it was done and he was approved by the foster system to take in a child. Since it was obvious that Izuku already had an attachment and that Aizawa had already taken care of him before, the adoption process might actually go faster. They would still need to have an interview, of course, surprise visits and meetings with the school every now and then to make sure Izuku was adjusting over the required months. Aizawa would foster Izuku before adoption, but Ryoko seemed to think everything would be fine. Since Izuku was taken in by the foster system because his father still wasn't responding and also stopped providing for the family since the beginning of the year, Aizawa wouldn't have to worry about custody from him. Honestly, the whole situation with the father made Aizawa dislike the man more, and he wonder why Ms. Midoriya didn't just divorce him. As Aizawa walked down the street, checking his phone for the address of Izuku's foster home, he almost regretted not asking Nimori to borrow her car again. The house was only 15 minutes from the train station, but the train ride was at least an hour. It would have been more comfortable for both of them, but then again, you can always sleep on a train. A cry of joy caused Aizawa to jerk his head upright as Izuku came running forward into his legs. Izuku was sobbing out how much he missed him as Aizawa got down to lift Izuku up into a hug. Not missing the dark circles under his eyes, 2 weeks and the kid still wasn't sleeping. Awkwardly patting Izuku's back as he sobbed, Aizawa almost missed the boxy-looking woman running out of the house in front of him. Her face went from being annoyed to forced worry when she saw Aizawa stopping before him. She bowed slightly. "I'm so sorry about this. Little guy is always run." Ning off, opening her arms, she gestured for Izuku to come to her while saying tensely, "Come on now Mido, let's leave the nice man alone." Izuku shook his head and hid his face in Aizawa's scarf, which made the woman's eye twitch before Aizawa shifted Izuku on his hip and held out his hand. "It's fine, I'm actually here to see Izuku. I'm Aizawa Shota, go to Ryoko called yesterday to say I was coming." Relief flooded her face before she replaced it with a strained, indefinitely fake smile as she shook his hand lightly. "Higuchi-sai, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please, come inside. Mido should have everything ready." Aizawa heard Izuku mutter something against his shoulder about not liking being called Mido as Aizawa followed behind Sai. Setting Izuku down by the door, Aizawa nodded for him to go get his things before he continued to follow Sai into her living room. Her husband, who introduced himself as Ikuro, seemed like the nicest of the 4 people living there. The 2 other foster kids acted polite, but like Sai, seemed like they were faking it, which annoyed Aizawa. Especially when Ikuro excused himself to help Izuku get his things, leaving Aizawa alone with the other 3. A few minutes of mindless chatter from Sai, short responses from Aizawa, and one brat asking him why he even wanted Izuku, which ended with said child being scolded, but it was obvious Sai didn't actually care that much. Passed before Ikuro came down the stairs carrying a large suitcase which held Izuku's clothes, and some of his toys and books, while Izuku came down with a backpack that contained the remaining books, pencils and toys. Izuku held Aizawa's hand tightly as they said goodbye to the foster family, Aizawa not missing the glares the 2 other kids gave Izuku. The husband seemed to actually be happy for Izuku though. Aizawa had a feeling he was the only one who might have been nice to Izuku during his stay, considering he was the only one Izuku actually seemed to want to say goodbye to. The whole thing left a bitter taste in his mouth. The walk to the train station was mostly quiet, except for the rolling of the suitcase. Izuku did ask if he could actually stay with Aizawa, which Aizawa assured him he could, causing Izuku's eyes to mist. The train came shortly after they arrived and Aizawa gave the suitcase to one of the attendants before finding them seats near the back of one of the carriages. Izuku seemed to be nodding off, but when the train started to move he jolted awake and instead decided to look out the window. Aizawa watched him for a moment before pulling out his phone and trying to continue working out shifts and such. Asking Izuku a few questions about the past 2 weeks cemented that Aizawa did not like the other 3 members of that house. Izuku didn't saying anything directly, but he didn't hide the flinch he made when Aizawa asked if he liked the other 2 foster kids. Putting his phone away, Aizawa glanced back to watch Izuku stare intently out the window as the scenery passed by. Closing his eyes and leaning back, Aizawa hummed, "Anything interesting?" Izuku shifted around slightly before he responded, "Sometimes, but that's why you have to watch, to make sure you don't miss anything. I don't know how you plan on catching anything when you're the tired kid." Aizawa huffed, "I'm not tired. Those things under your eyes are called bags and you usually get them when you're tired." This time Izuku huffed, "I don't want to sleep. Sleep is pretty great." It was both a blessing and a curse. Aizawa could remember the amount of times he didn't sleep in favor of working. Yamada once said he looked like a raccoon. Aizawa said he both looked and sounded like a shrieking cockatiel. Shaking his head as a response, Izuku buried his face into his arms. At this point he was losing battle. Aizawa sighed and sat up. Izuku was still probably having nightmares, so it made sense that he wouldn't want to sleep. It left a sharp feeling of guilt, but he tried to ignore it. Sleeping through the train ride would probably be easier, and there was still 40 minutes left to go, which wasn't necessarily that bad. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Aizawa held out his hand, which Izuku took without hesitation before he pulled Izuku down so that his head was on Aizawa's lap and began to run his hand through Izuku's curls. "How about this, you try to sleep now, and if it doesn't work, you don't have to do it until it's dark outside." Izuku yawned and patted one hand up and down in either protest or surrender. Aizawa didn't really know which, but it looked like Izuku was falling asleep, which meant he could sleep, so he was going to take that as a win. Or he was, until he felt his phone buzz in one of his pockets hissing. He pulled it out to find the bane of his existence. "Yamada. Shuuta Yamada, are you done? Yamada. What are you doing? Shota. Stop. Yamada. Shota. No, I'm someone else. Yamada. Ah. Yamada. Very funny. Yamada. But more importantly. Yamada. Is he there? Yamada. I wanna say hi to the little listener. Shota. He's asleep. Yamada. 0. Yamada. You should send pictures. Shota. No. Yamada. Betrayal. Yamada. I'm coming over. When are you getting back? Shota. Why? Yamada. I said I wanna say hi. Shota. Yamada. You should listen more. Shota. Say something that isn't bullshit then. Yamada. You will taint that precious listener. Yamada. How dare you? Yamada. Also I'll bring food. Shota. Fine. Yamada. And a billion presents. Shota. No. Yamada. Fine. 20. Shota. Do not overwhelm the brat. Yamada. 1. Shota. Will you stop texting me? Yamada. Yes. Shota. Fine. There's still 30 minutes left on the train and it takes 20 minutes to walk back to my apartment. Yamada. I'll get Namori's car. Yamada. Also, what does the little listener like to eat? Shota. Katsudon. Now shush. I'm trying to sleep. Yamada. It's a miracle. Yamada. Okay love, you see you don't sass everyone by YYYE. How one man had so much energy he would never know. Sighing, Aizawa let his head hit the window. Izuku stirred and buried his face deeper into his side but didn't make any other signs of waking. Yeah, sleep sounded nice. I already told you to be quiet. If he wakes up I'm going to murder you. Aizawa grunted as he pushed open the door to his apartment. He had Izuku's backpack and Izuku himself, asleep, on his hip. And stop taking pictures. His suitcase goes in the same room as before. Another snap from a phone had Aizawa glaring daggers at the man behind him. Yamada had one hand on the suitcase, the action figure of All Might. He had gotten Izuku dangling from one of its pockets. He likes All Might cause he's alright. I change my mind, go away, Shota. No. Bag of food dangling from the same arm he was trying to take pictures with. Nimari said I could borrow her car if I got pictures. Payment. Setting Izuku carefully down on the couch, Aizawa grabbed both the food and Yamada's phone before setting them down on the counter. Room, it's right next to mine. You've slept in it before. Ignoring Yamada's pout, he grabbed dishes from the cabinet and started to dish the food out from the styrofoam boxes. Despite his appearance, Aizawa was more likely to make food. He wasn't the best cook, but he still preferred it to take out. He wasn't going to eat out of a styrofoam box even if it did mean he'd have to do the dishes after. Aizawa glanced over right as Yamada came back into the living room, carrying the All Might doll and sitting down on the coffee table in front of Izuku. He's really small, kids are really small. Grabbing the 3 dishes and some silverware, Aizawa went to join him. Is there another reason you call him little, listener? And get off the table, I need to set these down. Well yeah, kids are small, but I mean, he's small. Flopping down on the floor and ignoring the glare, Yamada rolled over and sat up facing the TV while he continued to wave his hands around. Like there's small and then there's small, Ease the small, and how do you even wake him up? Should you wake him up? I wanna wake him up, but I kinda don't want to cause he looks worse than you. I also still kinda wanna say hi to the little listener. Aizawa stood staring at Yamada for a moment before taking a deep breath and sitting next to Izuku. He needs to eat, so yes, we wake him up, he can sleep afterwards. After receiving a nervous nod from Yamada, Aizawa set the dishes down and gently shook Izuku's shoulder. Izuku's face twisted before he slowly began to blink open his eyes. Sitting up, he almost seemed dazed, and Aizawa held a hand up before Yamada could say anything, signaling to wait until Izuku adjusted. Izuku blinked slowly and rubbed his eyes before he seemed to realize where he was. Letting out a small gasp, Izuku had jumped forward and hugged Aizawa's arm. Patting Izuku's head, Aizawa tried to get him to focus on the food when he heard another snap and looked up to see Yamada waving while he tried not to laugh as he took another picture. After they had finished eating, and Izuku had started to drift off clinging to Aizawa, he had taken Izuku and gotten him ready for bed before starting to sort out a schedule with Yamada for taking care of Izuku while he worked. Since Aizawa worked night shifts and they both doubted that anyone would babysit throughout the night, either Yamada or Nimari would come by and watch Izuku while he slept to make sure nothing went wrong. Aizawa would come back in the morning and whoever stayed the night could go home. When Izuku would begin daycare again in a few weeks, Aizawa would come back from his shift and take him to daycare, sleep while Izuku was there, and then wake up before Izuku needed to be picked up, then spend the rest of the time before his shift working and taking care of Izuku. Aizawa had a few days that his agency had insisted he take off, courtesy of the fact that he never took sick days or holidays, so that gave him some time to get Izuku settled before he had to go back. It was almost midnight when Aizawa had to practically shove Yamada out of his apartment. He knows Nimari is probably going to be just as bad when she insists on seeing Izuku. Dragging a hand over his face, Aizawa leaned against the door when he saw a mess of green disappear around a corner. So Izuku woke up already. Walking over to the guest room door, well, technically now it was Izuku's. He knocked lightly before pushing it open to see Izuku with his blankets over his head, clutching the doll Yamada had brought. The thing had practically given them both a heart attack when Izuku had started to cry until they realized Izuku was actually crying because he was happy with the gift. Izuku sniffed and tried to rub his tears away but still managed to look pathetically sad, especially when he tried to hide his face in the blankets. Izuku slept fine when someone was with him, but every time he was left alone he would wake up. The first week if Aizawa stayed in the room, Izuku would fall asleep without a problem, but after he left Izuku would undoubtedly be awake the next time he came back in. Aizawa had a tight-lipped frown on his face before he nodded to himself. If the kid needed someone with him, he would be there with him. Picking Izuku up, he carried him back into the living room before going back and getting a few pillows, a comforter and his sleeping bag. Setting everything in the couch, Aizawa got into his sleeping bag before setting Izuku on top of his chest, running a hand through Izuku's hair, since it seemed to help him calm down. Izuku buried his face in Aizawa's chest and continued to cry softly, before muttering that he missed his mother. Lying back, Aizawa sighed and continued to comfort him, "I know, kid." As Izuku's grip weakened as he began to drift off again, and Aizawa pulled the comforter closer around both of them. "I know. Ai-sama." A small finger gently prodded at his arm. "Ai-sama, Cobra Bubbles is coming." Aizawa shifted before sitting up to stare down at the small boy next to the couch. "Cobra, the social worker." Izuku nodded and pointed at the clock that read 10 minutes to 4 inches. "You said she's coming at 4. Running a hand through his hair, Aizawa sighed before getting up. "Yeah, she is, and her name is Gota Ryoko, not Cobra Bubbles kid, but call her Gota-san, got it?" After another, more energetic, nod from Izuku, Aizawa glanced around the apartment. It wasn't a mess. Despite having another person living in it and 2 others constantly visiting for the past month. The only major difference was that there were some drawings here and there. The psychologist they visited recommended that Izuku draw when he felt upset or anxious, or as Izuku put it, icky. There was some drawings on the fridge, a few sheets of paper on the coffee table. But most of them were in Izuku's room. One drawing of All Might on the kitchen floor that Aizawa had yet to remove from when Izuku was so lost in thought after another nightmare he didn't realize he had went off the paper. Yamada had been asleep, and Izuku, being the darling child he was, had decided that it would be easier not to bother him and to try calming himself down. It ended with Aizawa coming back to his apartment to find Yamada desperately trying to calm a sobbing Izuku and soapy kitchen floor. After that, Aizawa had made sure Izuku understood that it was okay to bother one of them, even if they were asleep. Then the 3 of them had ended up watching Disney movies until Izuku calmed down. Aizawa didn't remember most of them, dozing off halfway through Lilo and Stitch. A month of staying with Aizawa and Izuku was improving. He talked more, jumped around, slept and ate more, but there were still some problems. Izuku was terrified of strangers, scared of the dark, and sometimes would stare off into space for long periods of time. The teachers at the daycare had told him that while Izuku was shy, his new aversion to strangers was beyond that. Considering the circumstances, it wasn't surprising. Tying his hair up in a bun, Aizawa stacked some of the papers on the coffee table while Izuku ran back into his room, mumbling something about Hisashi-ji-san. The doorbell ringing stopped him from asking Izuku to speak up. "Right, social worker." Aizawa opened the door to a smiling Ryoko, who nodded before stepping inside. "It's nice to see you again, Aizawa-san, everything been going well?" Ryoko's eyes roamed around the room until they landed on Izuku peering out from behind his door. "Hey Izuku. It's nice to see you again, you remember me, don't you?" Izuku smiled slightly before running out to Aizawa's side humming out a yes. He had a black rabbit onesie on, one that Nimori had insisted they get when Aizawa went out with her to get Izuku new clothes, and 2 All Might dolls. One from Yamada, the other one from before. "Izuku's been doing better, haven't you, kid?" Aizawa patted him on the head while Izuku mumbled out a yes against his leg before holding out the All Might doll Yamada had given him. "Hisashi-ji-san got me this." Smiling, Ryoko reached forward and took the doll from him, eyes twinkling as she examined it. "That was nice of him. My daughter has one just like this. And I'm guessing Hisashi is one of the friends who watches Izuku while I work, yes?" Aizawa nodded. "Oh, okay, good." Handing the doll back to Izuku, Ryoko pulled a notepad out from her bag. "I'll probably need his contact information. Just as a reference, if that's alright." Aizawa was cut off when he heard his phone right from inside his room. He was about to apologue. Eyes to Ryoko when he felt Izuku tugging on his sleeve. His wide eyes practically begging Aizawa. "Oh, alright then." At least he could speak with Ryoko in private if needed. "You can answer it if it's Yamada or Nimori. But anyone else ask me first, alright." One hand rested on Izuku's shoulder as he nodded vigorously before he ran off to answer the phone, followed by a long, "Okay." "Say, okay, Izuku, don't draw out words." Another, shorter, "okay" came from Izuku before Aizawa turned back to Ryoko, who looked like she was trying not to laugh. Pushing his bangs behind his ear, Aizawa sighed and moved to go into the kitchen. "Sorry." I wasn't expecting anyone to call. I'll get you a drink. Is there anything you prefer? Oh, you don't have to worry about that. I don't think this will take long. I just have to ask you a few questions and check up on Izuku to make sure he, and you for that matter, are adjusting. Concerned, Aizawa turned away from the fridge to see why Ryoko had drifted off, lowering her gaze to the drawing on the floor. You have a drawing of All Might on the floor. Yes, he seems to be Izuku's favorite hero. Is water okay? Their meeting continued after Ryoko final. Why stopped laughing at Aizawa's deadpan way of addressing the drawing, discussing how both he and Izuku were adjusting, Izuku's good and bad days. Overall things went well. Izuku came back part way out to tell him Nimori had called to say she'd be coming early. After Ryoko left at about 5:30, Aizawa made dinner at about 6 and Nimori came to watch Izuku at 8 before he began his shift at 9. Nothing too serious that night. A couple petty thefts which were easy enough stop. Opening the door to his apartment, Aizawa saw Nimori sitting at the counter staring at her laptop. Mumbling a hello, he say. His gear down next to her before taking out his eye drops. How was he? A darling. Leaning back, Nimori stretched and cracked her neck before going back to her laptop. He woke up once and had a little bit of a hard time going back to sleep, but I just threw your sleeping bag on him and he was fine. Last time I checked he was still asleep. Nodding, Aizawa dragged a hand over his face. Izuku was definitely getting more sleep. Something he was glad for. He wasn't expecting him to get better in an instant, it had only been a month after all. But he still felt that. Shota stop. Raising his head, Aizawa met Nimori's gaze. Stop what? You may have that hole. I'm tired deadpan. Look, but you can't fool your big sister. I know I'm not your big sister. Shut up for a second and let me finish, taking a breath. Nimori placed her hand on his arm before continuing. That kid adores you, you're a grump but he does. You're trying your best, so stop making yourself feel guilty. Silence passed between them before Aizawa pulled away. I don't feel guilty, I'm just worried. Sweetie, darling, you little shit, don't tell me you don't feel guilty. I can see it, and you know what? I already have. Why? Amada calling me and asking if he should get this for Izuku or he should get that for Izuku. Both of feel guilty. Both of you are trying to make up for something that wasn't your fault. So stop. You don't need to. Izuku is a wonderful little kid who I'm pretty sure loves you, both of you, and me, to be honest. Pushing forward, Nimori put her whole weight on him and jabbed a finger into his chest. Okay. I told Yamada to stop doing that. Oh, you know him. She laughed. It was as good of an okay as she was going to get. He loves doing everything to the extreme. Pushing her off, Aizawa LKED into the kitchen to start making breakfast. I'm making eggs over rice. Do you want any? Nah, I'm alright. I'll get something on the way. Packing up her things, she winked at him before going to door. Besides, Izuku told me that you said you'd watch a movie with him when you got back. Yeah, something about one of the first heroes. Not All Might. No, he snorted. Gasping, Nimori smirked. Aizawa Shota, what? That was a smile. I saw it. It existed, and you think Izuku's adoration for All Might is adorable. She had almost missed it, but she saw the small smile on his face. Weren't you leaving? You're not denying it, but fine, be a grump, I'll see you later. Nemrui pushed the door open right as she saw Izuku coming out, dragging Aizawa's sleeping bag behind him and rubbing his eyes. Giving him a little wave, she shut the door behind her. Izuku stared after her until his eyes focused and Aizawa caught his attention. I'm making breakfast, kid. We can eat it when we watch the movie. Sound good? Letting out a squeal of delight, Izuku ran forward and gave Aizawa a hug, completely ignoring Aizawa telling him not to bring the sleeping bag into the kitchen. Can we make a blanket fort too? Yeah, we can make a blanket fort too. Aizawa huffed as Izuku took off, throwing the sleeping bag onto the couch before running to get more blankets and pillows. Letting a small smile grace his face, Aizawa turned back to cooking. He'd be an idiot to deny that Izuku was cute. He wasn't going to sugarcoat it. Aizawa had fucked up. He had made the mistake of going aft. A drug deal and didn't realize just how many thugs there were. When he thought he had gotten all of them, one he didn't notice had managed to sneak up on him and throw him into a wall. The resulting Fight left him sitting in a hospital bed while the doctor tells him he has to stay there for no less than a week. Their quirks can fix many things, but that doesn't mean they're about to let him walk away after he punctured a lung and fractured a rib. The punctured lung was fixed, but the doctor still had his worries. He may have also gotten a concussion from slamming into the wall in the drop due. WN may have also put him in a cast from landing awkwardly on his left arm. So yes, he had been stupid, but what he was more worried about was Izuku. 4 months had passed and Izuku was doing better. Month and Aizawa would be able to officially adopt him. The kid was finally getting settled. Izuku was an emotional kid, took things full force. Aizawa learned that early on. His usual reaction to things was crying, happy crying, sad crying, just crying in general. Aizawa could only imagine the amount of stress this would put on him. Slamming his head back into the bed, Aizawa hissed. He was perfectly fine. He could still walk around and do things. Sure, he had a cast and a headache, but painkillers would help with that. He didn't need to be here, but he couldn't leave until the doctors cleared him. Aizawa was glaring up at the ceiling when the door to his room slammed open. Yamada came bursting into the room looking disheveled, hair not even done up. "Shota, are you alright? What the hell?" Aizawa would have covered his ears if he could, grateful when a nurse came by and told Yamada to lower his voice. Walking over and sitting next to the bed, Yamada took a breath before letting it out slowly. "Okay, no shouting. But seriously, are you alright?" "I'm fine." Sitting up, Aizawa suppressed a groan. "There's nothing to worry about." Yamada didn't look convinced in the slightest. "They said you had a punctured lung. They fixed that, everything else will be dealt with later when my body has had more time to recover." Pursing his lips as he thought, Yamada nodded to himself when he came to a conclusion. "That's great. Because you know what? I'm going to kill you myself." Jumping up from his chair, Yamada almost slammed his hands into the hospital bed but stopped himself when he realized that that would be a terrible idea. Instead, Yamada threw his hands into the air, gesturing wildly. "What the hell were you thinking, you asshole? Taking on 8 thugs by yourself? It was fine, the last one took me by surprise. But I won't let that happen again." The look on Yamada's face could only be described as incredulous. "I guess that makes everything alright, doesn't it? This is the first time this has happened and I won't let it happen again. Everything is fine." The conversation was starting to make Aizawa's headache worse. "Fucking hell, Shota, no it's not." Yamada buried his face in his hands and let out a muffled shout of frustration. "I get a call at 3 in the morning from some hospital receptionist telling me you've gotten hurt and you're saying everything just fine. Everything is fucking perfect." Yamada let out a shaking breath before he looked Aizawa in the eye. "Does Nimari know? Does Izuku?" Silence passed between them before Aizawa responded. "That's exactly why I need you to calm down and convince the doctor that I'm fine and can leave." Jumbled words fell from Yamada's mouth before he slumped into his chair, Aizawa catching his exasperated, "You gotta be kidding me." Reaching out, he grabbed Aizawa's hand and tightened his grip. "Shota, I know you don't really care about your personal health, but please, give yourself a break. If you're worried about Izuku, I can ask the staff if he could stay." "No, forget headache." At this point Aizawa sure he had a migraine. "No. I don't want him at the hospital." Yamada gave him a blank look as he processed what Aizawa had just said before letting his head drop down with a sigh. "Shota, I'm sure it'll be fine if he stays. Hey, you could even. He doesn't deserve to be dragged down because of my mistake, he's been through enough." The slight raise in Aizawa's voice had Yamada forgetting what he was about to say. There was more annoyance in his voice than anger, but Yamada was sure that not all of it was directed at him. Hissing through clenched teeth, Aizawa rubbed his head to try and help the throbbing. "Izuku hates hospitals. I'm not going to force him to stay here. I don't want him anywhere near here. I'll call in the morning when I know he's awake and talk to him then, alright?" Concern was etched in Yamada's face as he laid his face down onto the side of the bed. "I'm sure you would be an exception. But if you're sure, I'm happy to watch him. I don't care if I'm an exception, it's still stress he doesn't need on top of this whole situation." Sitting up slightly, Aizawa looked down at Yamada. "And thank you. I appreciate you watching him, but I'm still going to ask Nimari too. I don't want Izuku eating fast food for a week." Yamada snorted but remained where he was. "I can cook, everything would just be terrible." Glancing up slightly, He offered Aizawa a small smile. "Don't worry about it, Shota, we're friends till beyond the grave." "Please no." The sharp laugh Yamada let out had Aizawa smiling despite the pain. Everything would be fine. He'd still had to worry about Nimari trying to kill him when she found out though. Nimari had been beyond annoyed when Yamada had called and explained everything. She called them both stupid, Aizawa for insisting he was fine, Yamada for not pushing Aizawa more. She was still more than happy to watch Izuku, because he's the only one who isn't horrible. Unlike you two dumb fucks. Both of them had decided that they would do everything in their power to make sure that Izuku had fun. When Izuku had woken up and they tried to explain what happened, they realized that maybe they should have prepared a bit more, because the first thing out of Izuku's mouth was a shrill sob and Izuku shouting, "Ai-sama is going to die." Yamada understood why Aizawa didn't want Izuku at the hospital. Apparently Izuku has only ever heard bad news from them, being quirkless, his current guardian getting banged up, so he instantly thinks something bad will happen. Plus they were filled with strangers. Izuku managed to calm down when Aizawa called, Nimari calling him an ass in the background. He promised to behave for the two heroes until Aizawa got back. He definitely didn't seem happy with not being able to see Aizawa, but he agreed with a mumbled yes while he wiped away tears. But currently what was worrying Yamada was the fact that he couldn't find Izuku. Nimari was making dinner, tan men with hard-boiled eggs, and Yamada had called the kid just before she had finished. When no response came, he opened Izuku's door to find no one there. He checked Aizawa's room, then the living room, then the laundry, but Izuku wasn't there. "You checked his room, right?" Nimari had her back turned as she finished up dishing out the meal. "Yes, I checked his room. That was the first place I checked. Not even a day and they had lost the kid. Aizawa was going to murder him." "Did you check in his room?" "Yes. Like in the closet or under his bed." "Okay, no, he may not have done that." Going back into Izuku's room, Yamada pushed open the closet door and found nothing before he got on the floor to check under the bed. And there was Izuku, bundled up in a green sleeping bag and some stuffed animals. The poor kid looked miserable. And Yamada wasn't about to have any of it. Going over and laying on his back next to the bed, Yamada held out a hand and waited patiently for Izuku to take it. Izuku hesitated before finally taking Yamada's hand, letting himself be pulled out and carried into the kitchen. He loosely clung to Yamada and looked like he was trying not to cry. Nimari had just finished setting the table when the two came out, giving them both a cheery smile. "Ah, Izuku." Reaching out, she took Izuku from Yamada, patting his back to try and comfort him. "You're worried about grumpy old Shota, huh?" Giving a meek nod, Izuku rubbed his eyes again as he mumbled, "I want Ai-sama to be okay." "Ah, little listener, don't you worry." Reaching out, Yamada ruffled Izuku's hair. "Shota's a toughie, he'll be just fine, so keep that smile up, alright?" Yamada gave him a giant smile and a thumbs up while Izuku gave him a watery, tight-lipped smile in return. Nimari made an OK symbol above Izuku's head, congratulating him on a good job. Taking care of Izuku for a week would be just fine. Both of them had dealt with various situations before. If Shota could do it, then so could they. Yamada was retracting that statement from 4 days ago. Nothing they have done could have prepared them for a full-blown meltdown. At least Yamada thought it was a meltdown. It might have been a tantrum, but tantrums were unreasonable. Maybe, he'd have to check later. Both Yamada and Nimari had seen Izuku cry, sometimes full-out sob. Izuku would get frustrated himself, or he would remember something and tear up, but usually before it got too bad, Aizawa would come back and Izuku would calm down. But Aizawa wasn't here and neither of them could get Izuku to stop crying. Izuku had been okay. Yamada wasn't sure if he would say okay. He'd been more quiet and sulky and he definitely wasn't getting as much sleep. It was taking a few step backs in terms of Izuku's progress, but the little guy would instantly cheer up when Aizawa would call, so Yamada and Nimari didn't think it was that bad. They had been so wrong. It was almost 1 and Izuku was sobbing in the center of his room as both the heroes tried to calm him down, so that they could get him to bed. Every time they tried to negotiate with him, "You could stay up another hour and watch the nighttime news, does that sound good?" He would violently shake his head and wail out a no. Nimori had suggested using her quirk, but neither of them wanted to explain that to Aizawa. So they were back to trying to calm him down in other ways. They couldn't even figure out why Izuku was so upset. Okay, that was a lie, they could, but they were sure something had set him off. Yamada was biting his nails nervously while Nimori sat on her knees in front of Izuku, gently patting his back and trying to shush him when Izuku shouted something that made them both freeze. Izuku was upset and tired, but mainly upset. Isama had asked him to behave while he was gone and Izuku had promised he would, but at this point he was really tired. It was really hard to sleep when he knew Isama wasn't going to be back for a while. It wasn't that he didn't like Hisashi Oji-san or Kayama Oba-san, he just liked being around Isama. Even though everyone said he was grumpy, Izuku always felt calm around him. He was almost like a blanket. Kind of. Izuku wasn't sure, but Isama always felt safe. He was easy for Izuku to understand and his reactions to things were always calmer. The other two heroes had a tendency to be loud when they were nervous. Especially Hisashi Oji-san. Even though the other two watched him, Isama was always there for him. Izuku trusted him. They're not the ones who held him when he cried about his mother or fixed his cuts or let him sleep next to them when he had nightmares or anything else in the past 4 months. The one who supported Izuku was Isama. So while Izuku had tried to behave, he was just tired. He was tried and he wanted. I want my dad. Dad. Confused, Nimori glanced back at Yamada, who looked just as baffled as her. Izuku didn't know his dad, right? Wiping his face, Nimori tried to get Izuku to look at her. Izu, honey, your dad isn't here. Violently shaking his head again, Izuku tried to shove her hand away before trying to cover his face with his own hands, letting out another wail. No, I want my dad. Kiddo, your dad is overseas. Yamada said hesitantly, trying not to upset Izuku further. Izuku let out another choked sob, which caused them both to flinch back. As he dropped his head, letting his curls fall into his eyes. I don't want him, I want my dad. He didn't want his dad, but he wanted his dad. If he didn't mean his dad, then that meant Izuku wanted. An excited gasp escaped Nimori's mouth before she grabbed Yamada's shoulders. Do you think he means? I guess. I mean, that's the only other person. Izuku, you want to go see Aizawa, right? The small nod they received was enough to have them both grabbing each other in joy. Yamada made up his mind then and there. We're going to the hospital, right now. Oh, definitely. It's 1 in the morning, but that man is never asleep when he's supposed to be. Brushing Izuku's hair out of his face, Yamada smiled down at the small boy while Nimori got up to get her keys. We're gonna go see your dad, okay kiddo? Quote. Izuku reached out and hugged him before sobbing out a happy, okay. Aizawa stared blankly at the ceiling. It wasn't like he could do much else, he would sleep. If he could, but unfortunately the fact that he usually got sleep during the day seemed to be preventing from doing now. He had just sat up when the door opened. Yamada looked like he was trying to hide his face while he stood there and Aizawa could only stare back at him. If that child is dead, I'm going kill you. Nah, someone just wanted to see their dad. Yamada really should have brought a camera. Because the confused expression on Aizawa's face was amazing. When Izuku came running into the room crying out for him, calling him dad, the white eyes expression on his face easily rivaled that. It lasted for a few moments before a connection was made in Aizawa's head. Reaching over, he tried to pull Izuku up onto the bed. Nimori came over and helped him, the cast making it difficult for Aizawa to do it himself. Without saying a word, he pulled Izuku down into a hug, running a hand through his hair as Izuku melted into the embrace. It's okay kid, dad's here. Aizawa continued to repeat his words while he laid his chin on top of Izuku's head. He paused once to give Nimori the finger when he noticed her pulling out her phone. So is it official? Yes, it's official. Izuku is now Midoriya Aizawa Izuku. Aizawa glanced down at the small boy swinging their hands back and forth while they waited for the light to change. You gotta say the thing now, we talk about it. Yamada, you're not even here. That's not the point. Izuku tugged on his sleeve. Is it Hisashi-ji-san? Holding the phone away from his ear, Aizawa nodded. Tell him I say hi. The brat says hi. Hi Izuku-kun. And don't try and deflect, say the thing. Letting out an aggravated sigh, Aizawa tightened his grip on Izuku's hand as the light turned green. This is my son Izuku, he's small and I love him. Yamada let out an excited gasp that had Aizawa holding the phone away from his ear before he started repeating how cute Shota-kun was being. Izuku, what did I say about Yamada this morning? Izuku let out a hem as he thought. Eyes glancing around, he's full of shit. Good job kid. Aizawa snorted as he ruffled Izuku's, causing the boy to start giggling. Shota, don't teach him that. Too late. Shota. Izuku kept tugging his sleeve down. Aizawa had noticed on the train ride home from the kindergarten. He was wearing his jacket, even though Izuku usually took it off on the way home, and every time the cuff came up slightly, Izuku would quickly tug it back down. It only added to his concern when he'd winced after Aizawa had tried to hold that hand. When they finally got back to the apartment, Izuku was less worried about his sleeve riding up and Aizawa was sure he had seen some kind of red block. How Izuku could have hurt his forearm while he was at school and Aizawa not get a call from them was astonishing. Maybe they didn't notice, which would have been irresponsible of them, or they decided it wasn't important, still irresponsible but also reckless. If it was the second option, Aizawa would lose complete faith in them being able to do anything. Aizawa leaned against the counter and waited patiently for Izuku to come out of his room, tapping his finger against his arm silently as the minutes went by. After about 5 minutes Aizawa figured that Izuku was probably hiding, which meant he noticed Aizawa staring at his arm. Right, Izu. It only took a few seconds for Izuku's head to hesitantly peeked out from behind his door. Gesturing him over with one finger, Aizawa crouched down in front of him so that they were eye level. Let me see your arm. Izuku shuffled his feet slightly and avoided looking at him before offering his arm, the wrong arm. Aizawa only has to give him a look before Izuku gave him the arm in question. When he pulls back the sleeve he barely catches the shock he felt. The burn was big, a little bit bigger than Izuku's own hand. It's nothing that requires a hospital but the wound was still an angry red and some blisters have formed. It was probably painful and extremely uncomfortable. Using his other hand, Aizawa pushed Izuku's head up. Izuku, what happened to your arm? It was an accident. For a second Izuku seemed shocked by his own outburst, causing him to try and pull away as he mumbled it again. Aizawa puts his hand on Izuku's shoulder to steady him before brushing the bangs out of his face. Okay, I believe you, but what happened? The teacher said we could play before it was time to go so we were playing tag and Kachan used his quirk on accident. Izuku's explanation was fast and got softer as he went on. Kachan. Izuku had never mentioned them before. Sighing, Aizawa sat back on the floor with Izuku. Izu, why didn't you tell the teacher? I didn't want Kachan to get in trouble. Izuku answered meekly, still wanting to shift his eyes away. Kachan wouldn't get in a lot of trouble if it was an accident. Aizawa crossed his arms and gave Izuku a stern look, and it was an accident, right? The nod Izuku gave didn't really convey him, but for the moment Aizawa was more worried about the burn. He had some supplies in the bathroom, for when he got minor injuries, that would work fine. Aizawa could get more later to make sure it would heal properly and not scar. Standing up, he motioned for Izuku to follow before continuing, I'm still going to have to speak with your teachers and don't make that face, they should have noticed something was wrong. Izuku was silent while Aizawa fixed and bandaged the burn, a few tears here and there but not much else. It seemed like his pain tolerance was high and Aizawa would have been impressed if it wasn't for the fact he was sure that wasn't normal for someone Izuku's age. He was just about done putting everything away when Izuku broke the quiet. Dad. Aizawa glanced over at Izuku, who was swinging his legs back and forth while he sat on the counter, carefully avoiding using his left arm for support. Can we watch the news tonight? Aizawa paused before placing the bandage wrap away. Usually Izuku got so wrapped up in watching the news and recording quirks that he forgot to sleep until it was already late. Nimori was usually more strict than Yamada, but the both caved when Izuku would look up at them with wide eyes. And though he usually wasn't cranky when he was tired, Aizawa still preferred that Izuku get enough sleep. But today was Friday, which meant Izuku didn't have school tomorrow. Yeah, we can watch the news. Helping Izuku down, letting him jump down on his own would have been irrational. Aizawa lightly tapped his shoulder. You can stay up to watch it with Yamada too. I think he'd like to see your new notebook. The smile on Izuku's face was so bright it could rival the sun. I can show him the notes I took on Edge Shot. Maybe he knows how far he can stretch his limbs. Or maybe. Izuku continued to ramble as he bounced around like he usually did when he got excited before bounding off to go find his notebook. Watching Izuku run off for a moment, Aizawa ran his hand through his hair before letting himself drop his calm demeanor to glare down at the floor. He didn't want to doubt Izuku when he said it was an accident, but the whole thing irked Aizawa. Izuku had been so adamant about it being an accident in the beginning, but his hesitance later on seemed almost like a warning to him. Izuku was selfless, and he took the blame for things that weren't his fault. It wasn't unbelievable that he would lie and say it was an accident when whoever Kacchan was had actually meant harm. But Aizawa would let it slide for now. Izuku was back. Wearing his All Might onesie and notebook underarm, already tugging Aizawa lightly over to the couch. Izuku knew his dad was glaring down at him. He could practically feel it. Izuku could lie and say a scraped knee or a bruised shoulder was from playing rough, but he couldn't exactly say a split lip was, especially with the small bruise forming at the corner of his mouth. He did try, but his dad had seen through it instantly. Aizawa was smart enough to know that Izuku looked more like he had been punched rather than just getting hurt while playing. It probably wasn't the best idea to try walking home by himself either, but Izuku didn't want to wait with Kacchan, and he didn't want his dad to see Kacchan either, because then he wouldn't be able to play with Kacchan anymore. Izuku's HEAD also kind of hurt from when he fell onto the ground after being hit. So technically his dad was mad at him for two things: lying about Kacchan accidentally hurting him for the past 2 weeks and leaving the school grounds when he was supposed to wait there. He just didn't want him to worry. His mom had worried so much over him. He could remember late night calls to someone when Izuku was supposed to be asleep. The messages she left always made her cry when she was done. Izuku, look at me. He didn't want to look up at him. Izuku already knew his dad was disappointed, and the thought of seeing it made the guilt he felt worse. He also knew that he couldn't really avoid it either. So despite the guilt and the urge to cry, Izuku looked up at him. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as he examined Izuku's face, turning his head slightly so that he could see the injury better. We'll put ice on it for now. When the swelling goes down, we can try using chapstick for your lip. Letting go, Aizawa went to get ice from the freezer, leaving Izuku on the couch. When he came back, Aizawa placed the ice pack against Izuku's cheek and waited for him to hold it before letting go and sitting across from him. After a few moments, Aizawa sighed. Izuku, you know I'm not angry, correct? Izuku almost wished he was angry. His dad's disappointment made him feel 10 times worse. Aizawa watched as Izuku gripped the ice bag tighter. He honestly couldn't tell what Izuku was thinking, but he did know Izuku felt guilty from his inability to look Aizawa in the face. So at least he understood he did something wrong. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Aizawa hissed before dropping his head into his hands and rubbing his temples. He honestly wasn't angry. Well, he wasn't angry at Izuku. He was more disappointed Izuku didn't just tell him the truth. That he was trying to defend a brat like Kacchan just wasn't rational. Moving over to sit next to Izuku, Aizawa pulled him into his side before Izuku decided that wasn't enough and crawled into his lap. Izuku, tell me the truth, has Kacchan actually been hurting you? Even though Izuku didn't respond, the way he clutched Aizawa's shirt tighter and the feeling of a wet spot growing on his shirt was enough. Leaning back and bringing Izuku with him, Aizawa pushed the hair out of Izuku's face before reaching over for a tissue to wipe his nose. Crying was messy, but if it helped, he wasn't going to complain. Besides, listening to Yamada cry over a cold or paper cuts was worse. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Izuku pushed his face back into his chest as he muttered. I didn't want you to worry, or anything bad to happen, Kacchan. Didn't want. No, don't look down. Izuku, look at me. Aizawa made sure that his gaze was stern. Not that it was hard to do, but he wanted to make sure Izuku understood. Do you know what my job is? Besides being a hero? Izuku looked confused as he slowly shook his head. My job is to worry about you. You're my son now, and even if you don't like it, I'm going to worry, got it? He waited for a nod before continuing. And Kachan is a brat who deserves a slap on the wrist, so stop worrying about him. But, Aizawa held up a hand to stop him. No buts, Izu. Now for the next part, which would be more difficult. When Izuku had first gotten the burn 2 weeks ago, Aizawa had mentioned to Izuku's psychologist that he was thinking about switching Izuku's classes or maybe even schools. He wanted to be ready just in case. The psychologist had said it would have been a bad idea. A new place, filled with new people was bound to scare Izuku, and they wanted to avoid that. Even though Izuku was starting elementary in a few months, he would be going to school with many of the same classmates, making it easier for him to adjust. But Aizawa didn't want Izuku near Kachan, so he would have to do the next best thing. You're not allowed to stay after school to play with Kachan anymore, understood? Izuku looked like he wanted to say no, but after a moment he nodded his head. And I'm going to ask your teachers to move your seat, since you said Kachan sits next to you. Izuku bit his lip but still didn't argue. Huffing, Aizawa ruffled his hair. Good, now. Lying is bad, but since you already understand what you did is wrong, you won't get punished for it this time, but next time you will. Aizawa grabbed another tissue so Izuku could blow his nose. Now go wash your face. Yamada is coming early to make manju with you and he'll panic if he sees you crying. Mumbling a soft thank you, Izuku took the tissue from him and rubbed his nose before peering over the top of it. Manju. Yeah, manju, but you have to clean your face first. Izuku instantly looked better as he jumped off the couch but paused and gave Aizawa a hug before running to go wash his face. Aizawa waited a few minutes until he heard Izuku turning on the sink before pulling out his phone. Shota, you're coming early, right? Yamada. Yeah, why? Yamada. Miss me already? Shota. No. Shota. I need you to bring things to make manju when you come. Shota. Just get pre-made ingredients. Yamada. Okay, Yamada. Why? Shota. Izuku is upset, so I told him you'd make manju with him when you came. Yamada. Okay, 1. Yamada. You know I'm really bad at cooking. Yamada. 2. Yamada. What do you mean he's upset? Yamada. No more being upset. Yamada. Sad face. Shota. I told him he wasn't allowed to be around Kachan anymore. Yamada. Who's Kachan? That's a dumb name. Yamada. That's not his real name, is it? Shota. That's what Izuku said it was. Yamada. Dumb name, but why did you say that? Shota. Remember that burn he got 2 weeks ago? Shota. It wasn't an accident. Yamada. Oh, Yamada. Oh. Yamada. If I'm bringing manju stuff, I'm bringing him more stuff. Shota. Do whatever. Yamada. I'm bringing him so many toys. Shota. No. I take it back. Yamada. I'm bringing him so many sweets. Shota. You are literally making sweets. Yamada. Movie. Shota. That's fine. Shota. Don't spoil him. Yamada. What are you doing then? Shota. That's one treat, it isn't spoiling him. Dad. Shota. Hang on. Aizawa turned to look back at Izuku, who shuffled his feet before coming back over onto the couch and lying down so that he was leaning up against Aizawa's side. Masori. Sighing, Aizawa lightly patted Izuku's head. You're okay, kid, just don't do it again. Izuku replied with a muffled okay as he turned over and buried his face in the couch cushion. Watching Izuku for a moment, Aizawa pulled out his phone again. I'm sorry, I can't tell if you're being serious or not. Of course I'm being serious, why wouldn't I be serious? Aizawa's grip on his capture gear shifted while he kept the villain pinned down under his foot. I remember saying it was a bad idea. PHFF please, you'd be an amazing teacher. That's not the point, Nimori. I don't even have a teaching license. Aizawa turned towards one of the police officers that was arriving and while muting his phone, showed them his hero's license just to be safe. One of the officers gives him the okay after he gave a brief summary of what happened. He'd need to give a full written one later on anyways, but right now he'd prefer to leave before the media decides to show up. Some people have already started to pull out their phones. Making sure his capture gear was in place around his neck and shoulder, Aizawa moves the phone back to his ear. Sorry, I was finishing something. But anyways, terrible idea, I don't even know where to get a babysitter. If you accept the job, I'm sure Nezu will let you get a license while you're teaching. That's what Yamada's doing anyways, and don't give me that, It isn't the best reason. I know Izuku's therapist recommended some babysitters that are specially taught to care for kids with trauma. Plus, think of how excited he'd be. His dad is teaching soon-to-be heroes. That doesn't sound like a good reason to be a teacher either, you do realize. Another terrible reason is that it's almost April, school starts for UA in a month. On top of that, UA would start a full week earlier than Izu's elementary school. Glancing at the clock on his phone, the shift Aizawa was covering ended an hour ago. And he had enough time to go back to his agency, sort everything out, then get Izu. Babysitter Shota, that's what babysitters are for. Wait, why do even have shift right now? Yamada's still sick with a cold. How? It was raining the other day and he insisted on taking Izu out in it. While he was still sick. Yes. For a man who's actually really smart, he's a complete idiot. He's smart but his common sense is off. Aizawa could hear muffled laughter through the speaker. I think his need to be over the top does that to him. Izuku was kicking his legs back and forth while he sat on couch. Curls bouncing lightly with his head down, but Aizawa could almost seize the gears turning. But you could still take me to school, right? Yeah, I can still take you to school. Leaning forward. He tried to catch Izuku's eye. Can I just walk to UA after school? Izu, we talked about this. I don't want you walking around by yourself, not until you're older. Aizawa sighed out as he leaning back. Kids usually did start walking home by themselves when they got to elementary, but he wanted to wait until he was sure Izuku wouldn't panic at being alone or being surrounded by strangers. Besides, you'd have to go on the train by yourself. Do you want to do that? Biting his lip, Izuku shook his head. Before Aizawa had mentioned the part about needing a babysitter, Nomori's been right about Izuku being excited about him working at UA. Naming off a bunch of pro heroes that had gone there with a glimmer in his eyes. It was still there now, just not as bright. I could get him. Was followed by a cough from Yamada, hair down, shades missing, surrounded by tissue boxes and slumped against the kitchen counter because it was nice and cool. You also got a job at UA, Teaching English. Aizawa turned away to glare at him. And I told you to go home. Nimori is watching Izuku until you're not sick. A muffled protest could be heard when Yamada pushed his face into his arms, but other than that, he made no other signs of moving. He did have some shiny star stickers on his face though, and a drawing of himself saying his signature phrase, "Everybody say hey." Courtesy of Izuku, who said it would help make him feel better. What are you gonna be teaching? Are you gonna have a homeroom? Aizawa glanced back at Izuku, looking up at him with doe eyes and a renewed spark. Hero informatics, and yes. Every teacher has one. You can teach them logic ruses. Izuku gasped out before going into a fit of giggles. While Yamada muttered something about Izuku being the only one who found logic ruses funny. And Izuku kept laughing, Aizawa could feel the grin creeping onto his face. Reaching over and pulling Izuku into his side so that all you could really see of him while he was laughing was his mop of green hair. Aizawa turned back around with his arm still over Izuku's shoulder. He's already better than most brats, he's smart. 3 things, why is that the only way you can smile? You're ruining that child. And you said that like he's a dog. The dead look Yamada was giving him would have made him snort if Izuku hadn't have pushed his head up so that his eyes were peeking over the top of the couch. I like dogs. Dogs are great. Cats are better, kid. Izuku let out a small gasp before he squished his cheeks together. Cats are great. Aizawa was ruffling Izuku's hair when Yamada brought up a point that he had almost forgotten about. Does Izuku have school on Saturdays? Aizawa made sure everything was ready the night before the first day of school for UA. The babysitter, Tadako Haru, had come by throughout the month so that Izuku would adjust to being around her, and so that Aizawa could explain things. Things like if Izuku cried, not to immediate why think something bad happened because Izuku cried for multiple reasons, one of which might be that he was actually just really happy. Or if you couldn't find Izuku, he would sometimes hide under his bed buried in a sleeping bag Aizawa had gotten him, which he usually only did on extremely bad days. Or when Izuku would get lost in thought, sometimes it was better to let him think rather than try to knock him out of it. He also mentioned some things that Izuku didn't like. Slime, or putty, was one of them, which was apparently sometimes used as a way to calm someone down but in this case made Izuku Incredible uncomfortable, which was understandable. Another was telekinetic quirks, which again, was understandable, a painful memory that sometimes even made Aizawa feel a sharp stab of guilt. Tadako had written everything down and assured him with a smile that she understood. And Izuku seemed to be alright after she came by the fourth time. The real test came when Aizawa had gone to UA to get things ready there. Leaving Izuku alone with Tadako for the first time almost a week before UA's school term would start. It had gone better than expected. Izuku had basically done the same thing as WH. And he had first come to stay with Aizawa. Hiding in the next room over but checking once in a while to make sure he wasn't alone. After 2 hours Izuku decided that things would be fine and had actually come out to draw with Tadako. Though she did say Izuku constantly asked when his dad was coming back. Hopefully when Izuku went back to school in the next week, things would go just as smoothly. The schedule he had was that he would take Izuku to school, then go to UA. Since UA school days tended to be slightly longer than average, specifically for the heroics department, ending closer to 3:30 or 4 if not longer. When Izuku finished school at 3, Tadako would bring him back to the apartment and watch him until Aizawa got back. Since Aizawa would be working part-time night shifts instead of the whole night, he opted to take a shift that started closer to 10 and ended near 3 in the morning. Both Yamada and Nimari still wanted to watch over Izuku at night, and honestly Aizawa was glad they did. Tadako may have been taught how to care for traumatized children, but Aizawa knew for a fact that Izuku would not fall asleep until he fully trusted her. So while he had everything planned out for Izuku, Aizawa didn't exactly plan on the students he would have. Most of them had been egotistical brats who thought just because they had a good quirk and had passed the entrance exam that the Y could easily become the world's next best hero. About 2 of them seemed decent and willing to learn, but the rest, they had calmed down after Aizawa had threatened to give them all a test. He should just make that a tactic. Testing them on the first day. Not only would it show their potential, but it might teach them that life wasn't always what they thought it was. Izuku running up to hug him WH. And he got home did improve his mood, but it wasn't enough to stop him from telling Nimari exactly how annoyed he was. She had started laughing at the beginning but laughed even harder when Izuku repeated the exact phrase he had used to describe one of his students. Shota, you just have to get used to having pompous kids, they'll settle down in a week or 2 inches, wiping under her eye to get rid of any tears from laughing so hard. Nimari leaned back before continuing, if you'd like, I could whip them into shape for you punctuating whip with a wink. Don't do that when Yamada is around, he's already complaining that Izu is learning too many curse words, and what are you doing? Nimari let out a questioning, before realizing that he was talking about the fact that she was leaning back on top of Izuku, who didn't seem bothered by it at all, flipping through his book happily, not even looking like he cared. Oh this. You know how sometimes you let Izuku stand on your feet and you'll try walking with him like that, and at the same time manage to keep a straight face. Yes, he really didn't know where she was going with this. And how Yamada has this thing where he picks Izuku up by his legs and pretends he's a mop. Aizawa made a face of disgust but nodded anyways, because it was, in fact, disgusting. But it made Izuku laugh, so he wasn't going to argue. It's our version of that. Nimari sounded very satisfied with her answer. But Aizawa still had no idea what she was doing, and at this point he wasn't going to question it. Yamada was staring down at the form over Aizawa's shoulder, glancing every so often at the other's face. Maybe you should have given him another shot. I don't think a villain would have give him another shot. Honestly, the kid would probably get killed in an actual fight. His pride would get in the way and he relied too heavily on his quirk. Pressing the palms of his hands together and resting them against his face, Yamada leaned over onto Aizawa's shoulder, as if being closer would help ease his mind. His parents are probably upset. Are you going to move a student from Class B up or take an applicant from the general department? Whoever qualifies to get in, will. And Nezu agreed that since Hajuki hasn't been making any progress of the last 2 months, then it was probably for the best. Aizawa sighed out before finishing the form with his signature, and I told him I would deal with any problems that come from it, but I'm not about to continue teaching someone who doesn't learn, has an attitude problem, and will just end up getting hurt because we encouraged false hope. There was a slight pause before Yamada spoke again, so basically you ripped the band-aid off. Essentially, most of the class needed a reality check at this point. Humming. Yamada slid down so that he was resting against the back of the couch. Nimari actually wanted to start bets on how long it would take you start expelling kids, she said a year. When Aizawa made an uncommitted noise to answer him, Yamada dropped his gaze down to Izuku, who was sleeping on a pillow next to Aizawa. Little listener really liked Hajuki-san's quirk, paper manipulation, right? Yes. But Izuku thinks every quirk is amazing and can think of a million applications for them. The most Hatsuki could think of was making the paper into blades. Izuku always saw the best of any quirk, no matter the type. He always thought of imaginative ways to use them. It was part of why Aizawa had first started to actually like the kid. When you don't have something, you don't take it for granted. Glancing back over at Izuku, who had squished his face further into the pillow, Aizawa remembered the letter Izuku had given him when he got back before his shift. It was probably still sitting unopened on the counter. He'd read it on the train to UA in the morning anyways. He heard Yamada groan about why they were even still up, and Aizawa looked at the clock in the kitchen telling him it was actually closer to 6:30. Which meant he had actually stayed up the whole time after getting back from his shift to finish up school work. Yamada was up because Izuku wanted to sleep in the living room. And for some reason he thought that meant he had to stay up the entire time to watch him. Readjusting the bun he had put his hair into, Aizawa nudged Izuku's shoulder until he was tiredly low. Oking up at him, "You have to get ready for school, brat." Izuku yawned and rubbed his eyes. "I don't have school today." "Kid, it's Thursday, you have school." Shaking his head, Izuku made some kind of grabbing motion with his hands and Aizawa took both and held onto them. "The teachers said we don't have school until Monday, that's why they gave us the letter. Sensei also said they'd call our parents." The letter, which he had neglected to read, and his phone which he still hadn't turned on. "Yamada, can you thanks?" Taking the letter out of Yamada's hand and opening the envelope, Aizawa skimmed through the words. Yamada trying to read over his shoulder again. "Dear parents, nearby villain arrest, damage to surrounding area, water and power will be turned off during repairs in this part of 2. WN, decided that the school will be closed until Monday when repairs are finished. We apologize for any inconveniences this may cause." Well, shit. Aizawa narrowed his eyes as he reread the letter. Error canceling the school because there's no water or electricity while they repair damage from an arrest. That makes sense, but you'll need to call Tadako-san. Frowning, Aizawa slowly shook his head. Tadako had mentioned she had other clients in the morning, and he didn't really want to call in. Bother her this early in the morning anyways. He didn't think his students would be responsible with their time if he didn't show up, but it wasn't like he could leave Izuku by himself either, which basically left one thing. "I'll just bring Izuku with me." There was a pause when Yamada was letting his words sink in, but when they did, he reacted as expected. Loud and excited. Aizawa had to cover his ears as he happily picked up and started to swing a very confused and tired Izuku around. Originally Aizawa had considered trying to hide Izuku but realized that it would be a terrible idea. So instead he hid Izuku until he made it past the gates into the UA building by hiding him in his capture gear. Giving a bag full of Izuku's things to Yamada, Aizawa skipped going to the teacher's lounge and went straight to Nezu's office to explain the situation to Nezu himself. Instead of doing what Yamada had suggested, which was to just pretend Izuku being there was a completely normal thing. Nezu had actually been very happy to meet Izuku, offering them both tea before Aizawa could even start. Tea apologized for how unprofessional this was. Izuku, surprisingly, wasn't scared of Nezu at all, taking the other's hand and shaking it lightly with wide eyes and no hesitance. Whether it was from him being tired or Nezu not being human, he wasn't sure. After Nezu said it was fine having Izuku around, even saying he should bring Izuku class because it would help the students somehow, which he couldn't see, Aizawa came out of his office to find Nimari and Yamada waiting from him. Nimari had scolded him while she pinched Izuku's cheeks, saying he was a killjoy for not letting Izuku wear one of his onesies. Yamada had tried to convince him earlier, but he had said that the onesies were Izuku's pajamas, and Izuku shouldn't wear his pajamas outside of the apartment. Besides, Izuku was more than happy to wear his floppy red hoodie. It matches my shoes. Izuku proudly held out a leg to show that they were in fact the same shade of red. Yamada was making the same pout he did back at the apartment. He looks like a Christmas tree. And received a small smack on the back of the head from Nimori, after a short glare, before she leaned down to coo at a giggling Izuku. I think you look adorable, Izukun. Class starts in a few minutes and both of you have won. Aizawa pulled Izuku out from the head ruffle Nimori was giving him and lifted him up onto his hip. Go be responsible adults. Hey, I can be responsible. Yamada. No offense sweetie, but you're the baby of the group. Rolling his eyes as the two starting bicker, Aizawa made his way past them mumbling a short goodbye while Izuku gave them a wave over Aizawa's shoulder. Which they both responded to with a very enthusiastic, goodbye Izukun. Walking to his morning class was more annoying than usual. Some of the students who were stalling outside openly staring at the two of them. They really should learn to mind their own business. Izuku was too busy distracting himself by making small braids in Aizawa hair to notice. Earlier, he had been disappointed that Aizawa let his hair down because he said the bun looked like one of those water pillow plants. Izuku apparently meant a succulent. Which was a good thing. Children were weird and Izuku was no exception. He had just reached the door to his class when Aizawa realized that in all honesty, he didn't want any of those kids to know Izuku was his. They would undoubtedly bother the poor brat about it, and Izuku didn't need 19 kids hounding him with questions about Aizawa. Sure, he was getting better and could now handle going to the store without having a death grip on Aizawa's leg, but that didn't mean Izuku still wasn't a nervous wreck when it came to people. He also didn't want them to get distanced while he was teaching because Izuku did something cute either. That's what Nezu meant by helping them. Training them not to get distracted. Thinking it over, Aizawa shifted Izuku's position on his hip before settling more of his capture gear around Izuku's shoulder to get his attention. Izu. I need you to do some things for me, okay? Izuku nodded mutely but maintained eye contact so Aizawa knew he was listening. Unless we're in the teacher's lounge, I want you to call me Ai-sama again. Alright. Izuku blinked. Yes. Good, and I need you to pretend that you're asleep. Pretend. With his face all scrunched up like that, Izuku looked very confused. Yes, pretend. You can do that for me, right? After a brief moment where Izuku thought about the two things he was told, he nodded and nuzzled his face into Aizawa's shoulder. Muttering the word, pretend, against it. Right. Adjusting his grip one last time, Aizawa pushed open the door and without pausing went straight to the middle of the board. Face. Remaining neutral even though the class was buying. Loud and no one was in their seats. Everyone sit down. Arashi, I've told you not to use your quirk inside the classroom before. Don't do it again unless you want to end up like Hajuki. Now that he was in front of the board, Aizawa began to write down the lesson plan. We'll be taking notes today, and at the end of the class there will be a short quiz on what you've learned. Sensei. Aizawa shot a glare over his shoulder at the girl standing up at her seat who immediately shrank back. You have this? Iori made a vague gesture with her hands to the area around her shoulder. Yes, it called a child. Don't worry about it and sit down, we have a lot to go through. Turning back to the board, the silence lasted for a total of 30 seconds before the students began to murmur softly to each other. Himawari-chan, I can't believe you did that. Do you think it's his? Look at that kid, he looks like he's 4, Aizawa-sensei doesn't look that old. It's definitely not sensei's, he does. He seem like the type to even want kids. I dunno, maybe he has like a high school sweetheart. I wonder why sensei is babysitting now. Maybe the kid's dad is someone important. Maybe sensei is actually a tiny Gashadokuro and is planning on eating him during lunch as a snack. The need to slam his face into the board was steadily growing larger. At least Izuku found their mumbling funny, based on the way it felt like he was trying not to laugh. Yo sensei. They really couldn't shut up, could they? Placing the stylus down, Aizawa slowly turned around to see the eager face of another one of his students. I know you said to ignore him, but you can at least tell us his name, right? His name. Glancing down at Izuku for a moment, Aizawa went back to writing before he gave Takashi a response. Problem child. Did you have fun? Izuku rubbed his face after he yawned. He actually did fall asleep partway through the class his dad was teaching. And even though his dad told him to pretend to sleep the whole time, Izuku couldn't help peeking at the students he would talk about at home. Iori-san definitely looked different than what he thought she would. Maybe he shouldn't have assumed that just because someone had a light controlling quirk that they would have a bunch of bright colors on. Or look cheerful. He was brought back from his thought when his dad ruffled his high R and crouching down in front of him. You can stay here for the next few class. Your notebook is in your bag and if anyone comes in and asks, just tell them I said not to bother you, okay? Okay. Smiling slightly, his dad got up and made for the door. Be good kiddo, and don't cause trouble. Izuku said goodbye when his dad left the room before trying to reach his bag, only for the door to the teacher lounge to open again and Hisashi-san to come sliding up to him. Hey Izuku, how'd it go in Shota's class? He's a real grump, right? Dad's not grumpy, he's just tired. Oh my dear sweet little listener, Hisashi-san placed a hand over his chest. You truly are too wonderful for this world. He slid over to the other side of Izuku and dropped down into his chair before snapping his fingers together. How about you come to my class next? That sounds like fun, right? I can go. Dad won't be mad. Technically Dad never said he had to stay here, but Izuku was pretty sure it was implied. Leaning back, Hisashi-san shrugged his shoulders. Nah, he won't be mad as long as I leave a note. Aizawa hadn't been pleased to say the least. Or at least he was sure he didn't look pleased when Yamada came back as lunch started. Holding Izuku's hand and Aizawa was just sitting at his desk holding the note. Maybe leaving, don't worry, I'm just stealing your son, I'll make sure he doesn't die, as a note wasn't Yamada's best idea. Aizawa did manage to convince him to go and get lunch for them at the cafeteria as punishment, both giving him a heart attack and annoying him. Nimari somehow wormed her way into getting him to get something for her too. He had just begun to grade the quizzes from earlier. Izuku sitting on his lapping braiding Nimori's hair. She had said she was jealous of Aizawa's braids, so Izuku said he would braid hers too, when he noticed Izuku staring across the room. Glancing up from the quiz, he saw Powerloader giving Izuku a small wave, and even though Aizawa couldn't see his face, he could tell the other was giddy. Looking back down at the quiz, Aizawa squinted as he tried to read the handwriting. You don't have to say hi from 10 feet away. There was an exi. Ted gasped and shuffling feet before Powerloader was standing next to Nimari. Hey kid, my name's Meijom Higari, nice to meet you. Izuku glanced up at Aizawa, to which he received an encouraging nod. Before looking back at Nimari, who gave him a reassuring smile. It's nice to meet you Meijom-san, I'm Midoriya Izuku. The answer was meek, but Powerloader didn't seem bothered in the slightest. You know, you're pretty small Midoriya-chan. I bet you could fit in the palm of my hand. Powerloader demonstrated the size difference by holding up one of his hands, which completely dwarfed Izuku's own. For a moment Izuku stared at his hand in awe before a proverbial light bulb went off above his head. Does the size of your hands have something to do with your quirk? How much you can carry? How far down can you go? Aizawa smirked as he listened to Izuku ask the questions he normally asked him when they watched the news after Aizawa came back from UA. He continued to listen in the background. Izuku asked questions with growing enthusiasm, and Powerloader returning the enthusiasm as he answered. At one point some of the other first-year teachers came in and were just as enamored with Izuku. Aizawa was just glad Izuku was having a good time and opening up more. Even though he wasn't having many problems at school, Izuku didn't seem to be making any friends. Yamada eventually come back with an apprehensive ectoplasm, who was apparently worried that his appearance might scare Izuku and that he might do something wrong since he never really interacted with kids younger than the ones at UA. The apprehension melted almost immediately after Izuku started asking him questions about making his clones. And when Izuku had held up an onigiri for Aizawa to bite while he continued to grade papers. But that detail wasn't important. He heard Izuku ask Yamada why Nimari and Aizawa called him by his last name. To which he said that whenever someone used his first name it sounded like he was about to be scolded by a parent. Izuku then asked why Yamada let him use his first name. His response was that Hisashi-san sounded cuter than Yamada-san. Aizawa had to fight the very strong urge to say bullshit. He was just about done grading the quizzes from his first class when he noticed one of the teachers standing by his desk, but he couldn't for the life of him remember her name. Quote, "So that must be the Izuku Mike is always talking about." She threw him a smile before turning back to watch as Yamada continued to tell the others about Eraser's amazing little listener. "You must be so proud, fuck." Aizawa paused when he saw the look of shock on her face before turning back to see Izuku wincing as he held a hand over his mouth, whimpering out that whatever he had just eaten was too hot. Yamada looked devastated. Nimari looked highly amused and the others looked torn between wanting to laugh and not knowing what to do. Smirking, he looked up at her again. "I am very fucking proud of my brat." You would think that with the lack of sleep he got, that Aizawa would be a heavier sleeper. Almost like the collective hours lost would knock him out. But he wasn't, and it was exact. Tlyy he woke up the instant he felt the bed dip down. It only took him a moment to realize the cause of the dip was Izuku trying to get onto his bed. Without opening his eyes, Aizawa reached over and helped Izuku up, which led to him instantly burying himself into Aizawa's side. But when the tension in Izuku's shoulders didn't fade, he pulled Izuku up closer to him and rested his chin on top of Izuku's curls. "Bad dream, kid?" "No. Just thinking." The response was muffled, but it didn't hide how tired Izuku sounded. "Have you been thinking instead of sleeping?" When Izuku didn't offer a reply, Aizawa sighed and reached over to check the time on his phone. "What were you thinking about until 4 in the morning?" Izuku shifted slightly and after a few moments he asked a question that gave Aizawa a feeling of guilt that he was almost starting to get used to. "Can we go visit my mom tomorrow?" "We can visit your mom whenever you want, Izu. Can we bring cake?" "Cake?" Sitting up, Aizawa brushed the hair out of Izuku's eyes. He should probably ask him if he wanted a haircut. "You want to bring cake?" "Yeah." Izuku nodded as he leaned into the touch. "It's her birthday, she liked strawberry cake." Aizawa bit his lip. He knew Izuku's birthday was in a week, but he hadn't realized that Midoriya-san's was so close to his. It would explain why Izuku seemed so distracted the last few days. He proba. Bly had been overthinking about how to ask. "Yeah, we can bring cake, you can pick out some flowers too, does that sound good?" "Yes." Izuku yawned and laid his head against Aizawa's chest, eyes flutter open and closed. Leaning over slightly, Aizawa gave Izuku's forehead a peck before laying back down and bringing Izuku with him. "We can do that in the morning since I'm assuming you didn't know that tomorrow was already today." In the morning, he felt Izuku struggle slightly and then glance up when he realized Aizawa wasn't going to let him sit up. "Yes, in the morning. But what about school?" Aizawa sighed. "Izu, you obviously haven't been sleeping well, you're not going to school." "No sleep, I don't need sleep." "Yes you do, brat." He opened one eye and even though it was almost completely dark, he could still see Izuku pouting at him. "You have work." "I can miss a day of work and you can miss a day of school, it'll be fine, Izu." "No," Izuku whined as he patted his hands up and down. "Fine. Then you go to sleep now and you can come to UA with me when it's time to get up." When he was younger, Aizawa would have laughed if someone told him in the future he'd be having an argument with a tired 5-year-old. Specifically his 5-year-old, who was thankfully only ever stubborn about sleeping and going to school, and occasionally asking for help. And Izuku was being stubborn. He looked conflicted over the promise of going to UA again but seemed to decided going to his school was the right choice. So he rolled off of Aizawa and continued to pout with his face in the mattress. And Aizawa did the only thing he could think of doing with said stubborn child, which was to roll over on top of him and ignore Izuku's protests about not going to school. Izuku would fall asleep so on anyways and Aizawa would probably end up letting him go against his better judgment. But when Izuku continued whine, Aizawa felt the urge to groan. "Kid, I love you, but sometimes you're the worst." Izuku didn't know what happened. Everything was fine, everything had been fine. Dad had made breakfast and shoved Hisashi Jii-san off the couch when he didn't get up while Izuku got ready for school. And he really wanted to go to school because school was important. And school was going fine, he was tired but he felt okay. Izuku took his notes like usually, he didn't answer as many questions because he was tired but up until lunch Izuku had been fine. Then he had just started crying and he didn't know why. He had just finished writing something when all of a sudden his throat felt scratcha. His eyes watered and everything just felt wrong. Kachan had seen him and told him to stop being such a crybaby. Deku and Izuku had honestly tried to stop crying but he couldn't. Everything felt lick. It was going wrong and it got even scarier when he couldn't breath. Izuku could vaguely remember one of his teachers running over and trying to get him to count. At least that's what he thought he heard her say. At that point everything started to sound muffled and nothing was making sense anymore, and then his chest started to feel tight and everything just started to be too much. Ito-san, the psychologist he visited. Or at least his dad said he was a psychologist, which was some type of doctor, but he didn't look like a doctor since he always wore funny sweaters instead of that white coat. Tall. Him that it was called panic something. Izuku was supposed to practice breathing and draw when he felt icky, but his hands were too shaky to hold the pencil right, so he just kept dropping it and that just made him more upset. Somehow he ended up in the nurse's office, but he didn't remember going there. Then there was someone rubbing circles on his back. Until another person came in and they started talking to them, but he still couldn't focus very well. It felt like he was being lifted up into warmth and Izuku just wanted to stay buried in it because it just seemed to scream safety. Why things started to come back and it was easier to breathe when his chest didn't feel so tight. Letting out a shaking breath, Izuku started to realize that he wasn't at school anymore and was actually on a train. After he spent a minute looking around, he felt a hand run through his hair and looked up to see his dad staring down at him. "How you feeling, kid?" He looked tired, more tired than usual, and he looked really worried. He didn't really know how he felt. Tired. Tired sounded right, but he also felt kind of sad and maybe some other things that Izuku really couldn't figure out, so he just shrugged. Dad sighed and pulled him closer, muttering softly that was fine, but Izuku was confused at why he was here. The train's clock said it was only 1:30. Pulling on his dad's capture gear, Izuku waited until his dad glanced down at him before pointing at the clock. He looked confused until he seemed to realize what Izuku was trying to ask. "Izuku, you had a panic attack at school. I came and got you." Izuku could feel his eyes start to water when it finally settled in. "I'm sorry." "Shish, no, you're okay, kid. You were tired and you've been thinking about your mom and everything else, A's." Awa wiped Izuku's face as he kept his tone soft and gentle. "Don't apologize for things that aren't your fault. I shouldn't have let you go to school." Silence passed where Izuku sniffled softly and Hi's dad hugged him while resting his chin on top of Izuku's head, holding onto others' hand the entire time. Eventually it broke when Izuku pulled his hand away to rub at his face but still kept himself pressed up against Aizawa. "Can we still visit my mom?" He heard his dad shift slightly as he sighed. "Yes, but if you start to feel uncomfortable you have to tell me, promise." Aizawa held out his hand with his pinky extended and waited until Izuku made the pinky promise. "Good. There's a flower shop right next to this next station. We can get some there and it shouldn't be hard to find." Offering ca. Guess wait, you wanted to get a strawberry one, right? That shouldn't hard either, but might be better to leave something similar to cake. Humming in response, Izuku continued to listen to his dad talk for the rest of the train ride. Aizawa knew something would go wrong. There was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind when he watched Izuku walk into school, and no matter how many times Yamada said it would be fine, it wouldn't go away. It was there when he started teaching his first class, and it was there when he got the call during lunch asking him to come down to Izuku's school because no matter how many times someone told him it would be fine, Aizawa knew Izuku. And he knew Izuku had a tendency to overthink, especially when he was tired. So when he finished the call he felt like a complete idiot. He should have listened to himself. He shouldn't have listened to Izuku say he was fine. He shouldn't have listened to Yamada saying that it was fine. Izuku was a tough kid. Just Becca. You were tough didn't mean you weren't susceptible to breaking. But the feelings of self-hatred and dread were replaced with almost a mind-numbing worrying when he saw Izuku shaking, curled up on the bed in the nurse's office, choking back soft sobs, not even responding to the nurse as she rubbed his back that was trying to calm him down. Aizawa spoke briefly with the nurse before picking Izuku up and cradling him. Izuku immediately clung to him, but other than that he didn't responded to anything else. His things were already together. Some kid named Bakugo demanded he do it and bought them down to the nurse's office earlier. So all Aizawa really had to do was sign Izuku out of school. Finishing up and walking to the train station, Aizawa had just sat down when he noticed a folded slip of paper sticking out of Izuku's backpack. Pulling it out, Aizawa flipped it over to see Izuku had written something on the bottom corner. For Mom. Aizawa stared down at the letter before sliding it back into the pocket and sighing. Everything was just going to be a guilt trip today. Leaning back, Aizawa repeatedly ran one hand through Izuku's hair while he pulled out his phone with the other. Luckily he didn't have a shift that night, but Tadako didn't need to pick up Izuku, and he should probably mention this to Izuku's psychologist. When he was almost done he felt Izuku stir but waited until he was finished looking around to try and get his attention by running a hand through Izuku's hair again. "How you feeling, kid?" The flower shop at the station was nice, granted Aizawa had never really gone to any before now. Once in high school when Nimori had insisted on Valentine's Day gifts, but even then he hadn't paid attention to the actual store. Izuku had asked him what type of flowers people usually got, which was usually white chrysanthemums, but Aizawa also told him to get whatever he thought was nice. Izuku ended up picking out the chrysanthemums and lilac purple stalks. While he was paying, Aizawa notices a small bundle of hyacinths on the counter. He picked a purple one out from the bundle and studied it before placing it with the rest of the flowers. When they went to the store afterwards, he had gotten Izuku to agree that leaving offering cakes and strawberries was a better idea than leaving an actual strawberry cake. The walk to the cemetery had been quiet. Aizawa had asked Izuku if he was still alright, and Izuku had just nodded, his grip on the flowers loosening for a moment. When they got there, Izuku had insisted he do things by himself after Aizawa had tried to place the flowers in one of the vases. So Aizawa stood off to the side slightly as Izuku brushed away any leaves and dirt that had gotten on the headstone, placing the cakes and strawberries in a bowl. Leaving the letter he had written under the bowl, and lighting incense, Aizawa had lit them and then handed them back to Izuku. He kept an eye on Izuku for the most part, but when Izuku had bowed down to pray, Aizawa had turned away to give some sort privacy, even if he was only standing 3 feet away. Izuku had tugged lightly on his pant leg after he was done a few minutes later. Aizawa glanced down to see Izuku sniffling before he got down on his knee and pulled Izuku into a hug. "You're okay, kid, come here." Picking Izuku up, Aizawa paused to look at the Midoriya-san's headstone before setting the hyacinth he bought next to Izuku's letter and continuing to move past. He had only made it a few steps before he felt Izuku start to shake and his grip tighten. "Kid, do you think she's happy?" Aizawa pulled away so that he could look at Izuku, only I see him refuse to look up. "What, do you think my mom's happy?" How was he supposed to answer that? It's not like he could just know. "Just be calm." Izuku needed calm. Placing a finger under his chin, Aizawa made Izuku look up. "Are you happy when we're at home?" Izuku didn't hesitate when he nodded. "If you're happy, then I'm sure she's happy, Izu. Promise." Tears were starting to well up in Izuku's eyes again. "I promise." Aizawa barely had any time to react when Izuku surged forward and wrapped his arms around Aizawa's neck again. He waited until Izuku had calmed down before changing his grip so that Izuku was more comfortable, and glanced back at the flower he had left. "I won't let anything happen to him, I promise." Yamada wasn't sure how Shota did it. "Is Mike alright?" Because he was pretty sure he would have died by now. "Oh, he's fine, dying on the inside, but other than that." He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned around to see Khan looking concerned. "Mike, you've been staring at Eraserhead for the past 10 minutes. Wait, what?" Glancing down at his phone, Yamada saw that he really had spent 10 minutes watching Shota. There was only 30 minutes before classes would start. But in all honesty, he was sure no one could blame him. Shota had come in earlier with Izukun in his rabbit onesie, the best onesie in his opinion, still asleep against his shoulder. Yesterday had completely tired the poor little listener out, and Shota didn't want to wake him up. Understandable, Yamada wouldn't want to wake him up either. He would bundle Izukun up in the fluffiest blankets and drown him in stuffed animals until Izukun didn't feel sad anymore. It looked like Shota had planned for that, since Izukun's sleeping bag and All Might dolls were there. But what was currently killing Yamada though, was Izukun and Shota just being so purely cute. Nimari had taken his chair, stolen his chair, after Shota came in so that he could set Izukun down and not have to worry about waking him up while he made sure his lesson plans were in order. After a few minutes Izukun had almost woken up, he looked unfocused and was leaning heavily against Shota's side but seemed very content to do so. At some point while he was looking over the lesson plan, Shota had started to grimace down at the paper whenever he saw something he didn't approve of, and Izukun would stick out his tongue in response, almost like he was agreeing even though he couldn't actually see what Shota was looking at. When Shota would notice him sticking out his tongue, he would mimic Izukun until Izukun stopped. And Shota would do it with a blank face, which Yamada couldn't understand because watching them was enough to kill him. And Yamada was trying very hard to explain that to Kon, who didn't seem to understand until he saw Izukun and Shota do it for himself. I was not expecting that out of Eraserhead. Kon sounded very astonished as he watched them. Nimari snorted as she picked up a folder from her desk. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't do that with any other kid. Izukun's his sweet little youth. Leaning back, she tapped her pen against her cheek and thought. I saw a sweater the other day that had, "Please be nice," on it. I was very tempted to buy it for him. He should have that sweater, he should have everything in the world because he's adorable and sad and I love him. You got your buying privilege revoked again, didn't you? I bought him 15 different stuffed animals from the Studio Ghibli movies. There. Yamada could feel Nimari patting his back reassuringly. You'll probably get it back this week. Did Eraserhead leave early for Midoriya-chan yesterday? Both Nimari and Yamada shot up to look at Kon. He left AF. He got that phone call during lunch and didn't say anything. It must have been important, the students have term finals coming up. Yeah, Yamada bit his lip as he looked back to see Shota start. To put things away, Izukun was having a bad day. Kon wore a grim expression when he spoke again. He's the same kid from that incident a couple months back, isn't he? The one where that slime villain killed that woman. They never said what happened to her son. I thought he went into foster care. When neither of them responded, Kon took that as his answer. Eraserhead may be a hardass, but based on what I've heard and seen, he seems like a good dad. Kon chuckled as he turned back to his own desk. My class is still going to wipe the floor with his though. He'd probably agree with you on that, Yamada hummed. Glad for the change in topic. I don't think he has faith in most of his students anyways. Oi Eraser, where you going? Class doesn't start for another 15 minutes. Quote. Shota didn't low. Okay back as he continued to pick up the bag he kept Izuku things in. I'm taking Izu to recovery girl. Nezu recommended earlier to ask her if it was alright for him to spend the week with her. He's still tired and doesn't need to put up with students, or people stealing him away. He gave Yamada a pointed glare at the end. Right. He almost forgot that Shota was taking Izukun out of school until after summer vacation. Since it was so close to term finals it would make things easier for Shota, and Izukun didn't have finals yet anyways. He doesn't have to worry about them until 5th grade. No 7th. All that left was schoolwork, but Shota mentioned he was getting it sometime this week so Izukun wouldn't fall behind. Not pretend. Izukun muttered before he went back to leaning against Shota's leg. Yeah, not pretend. Ruffling his hair, Shota picked Izukun up. He looked like he was about to doze off again anyways. Oh, I'll come too. No, you'll insist on staying there until you're late for your class. Nimari chirped up from beside him. I think he'd be spending his time wisely. He didn't have to see Shota's face to know he was rolling his eyes. Or smiling. Chio didn't need to look up to know who was knocking on her office door. Aizawa had always been a very polite student when he attended UA, even though he could be frustrating when he insisted on taking care of his own injuries. When he finally accepted help he expressed the utmost gratitude and would be apologetic for bothering her. Sometimes she wished all the students were like that. Turning away from her desk, she saw Aizawa come in and bow slightly, holding up what she assumed was Midoriya-chan. When he turned to close the door behind him, there were black curls peeking out from over his shoulder, and based on how the light hit then they turned green. Aizawa-san, good morning, she offered Midoriya-chan a smile as he turned his head to peek at her, and good morning to you too Midoriya-chan. He looked tired, eyes red and droopy, but even so, He gave her a wave before Aizawa set him down on the bed next to her desk. Thank you again for doing this. Aizawa hung a tote bag, an All Might themed tote bag she noted. Down near the foot of the bed, Izuku has everything he needs in here and I'll be getting the work he needs to make up for school tomorrow. He's still somewhat tired so he'll probably be quiet. If there's anything you need to know. Yes, I know how to take care of kids, don't worry. Jumping down from her chair, Chio started to wave her syringe cane at him. Go teach those children what they need for the future. Despite Chio waving her cane at him, Aizawa hesitated as he was leaving, only to have Midoriya-chan catch his sleeve. He looked apprehensive for a moment but T immediately turned to guilt as Midoriya-chan let go of his father's sleeve and instead began to wring his hands together. Aizawa placed a hand reassuringly on top of Midoriya's to stop them from moving. When Midoriya-chan looked up at him, Chio knew they were probably having a silent conversation. She could remember students and teachers alike commenting on Aizawa being emotionless, mainly saying how it wasn't a good quality for a hero to have, but it was more like Aizawa didn't show what he was feeling outwardly. Unless you understood that he could come off as cold. Watching this display showed just much of a softie he could be. After a few moments Aizawa sighed before smiling and taking his capture gear and draping it over Midoriya-chan's head, half of it falling off of his shoulders. Don't give Recovery Girl any trouble kiddo, I'll be back by lunch. Once he was sure Midoriya-chan was alright, Aizawa nodded goodbye to Chio before leaving for his class which started in a few minutes. Getting back in her chair, she was about to continue working on a form for one of the second-year students when she had the feeling she was being watched, but when she looked back at Midoriya-chan, he was looking very much like he was trying not to be caught watching. Aizawa had mentioned he was shy. I didn't get to meet you last time Midoriya-chan, but the other teachers said that they enjoyed your visit. Ectoplasm was especially happy. Really? That certainly got his attention, if the way he was peeking out from underneath Aizawa's capture gear was anything to go by. He can sing really well. So Ectoplasm had decided to show him his love of karaoke. Yes, why wouldn't they like having you visit? Some people are only nice when your parents are there. Midoriya-chan muttered wrapping himself further in the capture gear. Oh, well then, do you want to help me sort out some of these papers? A distraction might be a good thing right about now. She couldn't help smiling at Midoriya-chan's wide-eyed expression. It amused her that someone so young could find this part of her work so interesting. Shota-kun, can you check on Izu? Shota-kun, the students have decided why want to ask me last-minute questions about their final? Shota-kun, and apparently it has to be now Shota-kun, I'll be there once they're finished. Tapping his fingers across the back of his phone, why? Yamada spun on his heels and started walking in the opposite direction. Yamada, of course. Yamada, do you want me to take him to the cafeteria or just wait with Recovery Girl? Shota-kun, preferably why? Tea with Recovery Girl, but if this takes too long go ahead and eat. Yamada, nah. Yamada, I'll wait for you Mr. Grumpy Caterpillar. The only time he actually saw Shota eat at the school was when Izukun was there. And that was only because Izukun fed him. Otherwise he would have just drank those juice pouches with jelly in them. Shota-kun, thank you Yamada. Yamada, lack of a comeback hurts me s. How does Shota-kun, why do you think I do it? Yamada, you monster. Yamada, absolute monster. Yamada, I might have to take Izukun and raise him myself. Shota-kun, that's nice. Shota-kun, I'll make sure tell Tadako that she'll needs to take him to your house instead. Yamada, why are you like this? Asshole. Boot Yamada still loved him, for whatever strange reason. Sliding his phone back into his pocket and finger-gunning at group of passing students saying hello, Yamada cracked his knuckles before opening the door. Izukun. Yamada Hazashi. Okay, maybe not the best idea to burst into a nurse's office shouting. Rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly as Recovery Girl gave him a stern look, Yamada stepped quietly into the room. Next to her was Izukun, asleep and tangled in Shota's scarf. With his sleeping bag opened up on top of him. Sorry, I didn't think he'd be asleep. Well, he wasn't an hour ago. He helped me sort some papers into alphabetical order. She sighed and flipped the book she was writing in closed. You had him doing paperwork. Yamada sat down at the foot of the bed before gentle pulling away some of the scarf from around Izuku's face. It was a good thing he didn't drool. That would have been gross. Recovery Girl chuckled as she reached up to place the book away on the shelf above her desk. He was very happy to do it. I gave him some gummies as payment. She gave everyone gummies. So that wasn't surprising. Did you get to see his notebook? I don't know if you're in this one or the last one. Recovery Girl furrowed her brow. I'm in it. Yeah, Izukun pretty much has every hero in it. Everyone who teaches here included. Well, I haven't seen Nezu, but he'll probably be added at some point. Reaching over into the tote bag, Yamada grabbed the note book and flipped through it. I guess you're in the older one. Handing the notebook over to her, Yamada watched as her face went from curious to thoughtful and then amused. Corners of her eyes crinkling when she smiled. She was probably looking at one of the notes that was recently added. When Izukun had first shown them his notebooks, they had decided to add their own touch, they being all three of them but usually himself and Nimori. Izukun's notes were all in pencil, Shota's in black pen, Nimori's in some fancy metallic pen that switched between blue and red, and Yamada wrote in gold. The notes ranged from actual useful facts to stupid jokes like Eraserhead weaknesses being cat paws and tired Izuku's, bugs equals death written in large gold font on Yamada's page, Nimori writing, wimp, at the bottom. And Izukun had written, says weird things at the top of his midnight page, referring to when she used her more colorful language that Izukun didn't understand yet. Eraserhead's ability to make his hair stand up when he uses his quirk as magic. Recovery Girl glanced up unquestioningly at him. Yamada shrugged and pushed his glasses up onto his head. Okay, not even Shota knows why that happens. We all agreed it was completely valid for me to write that. No one could answer why Shota's quirk did that, not even quirk specialists. It wasn't like it contributed to him being able to erase quirks either. So Yamada was going to call it black magic even though it was probably a quirk of some distant relative that got passed onto Shota along with eraser. Floaty hair and things around you quirk. Recovery Girl closed the notebook and handed it back to him. Midoriya-chan has a good eye for detail for someone so young, it's a wonderful talent. Wonderful talent for a great kid, he didn't care if he was getting repetitive. Izukun was amazing and Yamada would tell everyone how amazing he was. A loud buzz tore their gaze from Izuku to whatever was making on Recovery Girl's desk, which turned out to be a pager. I need to check on something very quickly. She pocketed the pager and jumped down from her chair. Can you watch Midoriya-chan until Aizawa-san comes down? He threw her a thumbs up and she was leaving. He came down to check on Izukun, so that was fine, before sliding into her chair and swiveling around. Yamada soundlessly tapped his fingers along his jaw, humming as he thought about music he could use on his show. Maybe a new artist would be good. He hadn't heard a lot of their music, but he could ask Shota his opinion about it later. Or Nimori, she had a good taste in music. Something small gently grasped his arm and he looked down to see Izuku's looking up at him tiredly, or that's what he thought Izukun was doing. Kind of hard to tell while his glasses were still on top of his head. Have a nice nap. He was always so cute when he woke him in the mornings, making grabby hands and leaning against Shota's leg until Shota had to shoo him away so that he would get ready for school. Right now Izukun was just holding onto his jacket sleeve. Eventually he let go in favor of pushing himself up and rubbing his eyes before looking around the room in a daze. Recovery Girl's not here. Izukun. She had to go help someone real quick. Izukun looked back at Yamada and seemed to focus above his head. You can't see. It's blurry but I can still see Izukun, slipping his glasses back on his face. Yamada made a pose, but with my super cool shade glasses I can just see clearer. Kayama Oba-san says they're tacky and you should just wear contacts, but I think they're cool. Of course you think they're cool. Because you're super cool. He reached over to pinch one of Izukun's cheeks, causing the younger to bat and whine at the offending hand. Takashi W. As awkwardly shuffling his feet in the doorway as Yamada let go of Izukun, who was sticking his tongue out in protest of having his cheeks pinched. I wanted to ask Recovery Girl something. But see she's not here. Should I come back later or wait it here? You have lunch right now so you could wait here, it's all up to you my listener. I'll just come back later. Takashi drifted off for a mo. Meant before pointing at something behind Yamada, it's problem child. Problem child. Turning around, Yamada realized he must have been talking about Izuku, who had his head cocked to the side. Where did you get problem child from? Little listeners, not a problem. Aizawa-sensei called him that. But that reminds me, stepping out of the doorway, Takashi came to stand in front of Izuku. Is Aizawa-sensei your father? Well, Yamada had actually prepared for this type of question so he could easily answer. No. Izuku looked as confused as he sounded, and frankly Yamada was confused too. Takashi looked less confused but then seemed to accept Izuku's answer. Okay, so where is he then? My father. Yeah kid, that's what I just asked. Izuku drifted off as he stared down at his hands before waving his left one off to the side. He's left, like the side you hold your tea bowl. What, was that something Shota told him to say? Okay. Leaning forward, Takashi crossed his arms. So is left like, Europe. Your dad's in Europe. Izuku shook his head and pulled the capture gear closer to him. No, my dad's here. Okay, so Shota probably didn't tell Izuku what to say, or Izuku was getting whatever Shota had said very confused. Oh, so you have two dads. Why would Shota even tell him to say that? Or any of this? It didn't really make any. Oh wait. No, I have one. Yamada had to fight the urge to burst out laughing. Izuku wasn't making up a story, he was just saying what he knew. It was really weird, but apparently Izuku didn't think father and dad had the same meaning. After an appointment with Izuku's psychologist, Shota had found out the Izuku saw a father as more of a title in a way, like someone can be a hero but that didn't mean you knew them or had any personal connection. In this case, Izuku knew he had a father that wasn't Shota, but that was all he was. A word. But dad on the other hand was just Shota. Dad to Izuku was an actually father figure, someone who took care of you. Someone he trusted. Basically Shota. So that was the misunderstanding. Father and dad to Izuku had almost two completely different meanings. A father was someone who was apparently somewhere left. Yamada didn't know where Izuku got that from, but it was surprisingly accurate if you translated it into English, since left had dual meanings, and a dad was what people usually defined a dad as. Okay, Takashi was squeezing the bridge of his nose at this point. How about I just get your actual name then? Izuku made an O shape with his mouth, just now realizing he had never actually properly said hello to Bamako yet. My name's Midoriya Izuku, it's nice to meet you. Takashi Daichi, it's nice to meet you. Poor listener looked defeated, he was probably hoping he'd get some real information. Yamada couldn't blame him, he was just as nosy when he was a first year. But then Takashi's eyes snapped open as he seemed to come to a realization. Wait, Midoriya Izuku. I know your name. Turning around, Takashi started to make for the door. If I know your name I can ask Shoza to use her stupid quirk, and then Shota was standing in the doorway when Takashi had almost ran into him. Giving him a look that to his student would make it seem like he was questioning Takashi's existence, when in actuality Shota was just curious on why Takashi was even there. I'll just go to the cafeteria. Yeah, that, Mike-sensei, Aizawa-sensei. Takashi gave a meek wave, then slid past Shota so that he could make a mad dash away from any trouble he thought he was in. Shota glared after Takashi before sighing and pushing the hair out of his face. How hard do you think it would be to expel an entire class? No, don't do that. That was a very bad idea, very bad. Like you would probably get fired bad. But Nezu was known for being harsh under that happy exterior, and knowing Shota, he was probably seriously considering that option. So Yamada would need to make sure he wouldn't expel an entire class. Placing his hands on Izuku's shoulders, Yamada looked him dead in the eye. This was very important. Izuku, tell your dad that he can't expel an entire class. And Izuku seemed to be considering what he was told very thoroughly before he looked up at Shota. Himawari-san is nice, can she stay? He really wanted to throw something at Shota's shit-eating grin. The sound of rain hitting the window made Aizawa thankful that he remembered to bring an umbrella. Izuku was over by the window watching it come down in waves. Every time that there was thunder he would flinch back, but after a moment he continued watching it. At least there wasn't any lightning, or at least none that he could see. Glancing outside for a moment, Aizawa leaned back in his chair. It was slightly past 6 already, and there wasn't much else that he needed to do anyways. Izu, come get your bag. Since it was getting close to when he normally made dinner, they could just eat out. Aizawa wasn't going to make Izu wait until they got home. What do you want to eat tonight? Anything you want, kid. Izuku jumped down from his chair and started to pat the desk while he thought, his chin barely reaching the top, can we get sukiyaki? I said anything. But what if you didn't want sukiyaki? Then I wouldn't have said anything. Aizawa smirked as he pushed hair down in front of Izuku's face, making him giggling. Wake up, Yamada, you want him to come too, right? MMMHMM. Pushing away from the desk, Izuku hopped over to Yamada and started to gently poke his cheek. Hizashi Jii-san. Nimari threw a wad of paper at him as she pouted but didn't turn away from her screen. Don't I get an invite? Nimari, you're awake and I'm certain you already know that you can come. I think Midnight is being polite. Powerloader snickered from across the room, half listening to them while he looked at some of the designs his students had made. First time for everything then. Rude. You can be. Ignoring Nimari sticking her tongue out at him, Aizawa continued to put his things away until Izuku flopped over onto his lap. Zashi Jii-san is pretending to be asleep. How can you tell? Yamada did look unusually still. If he was pretending, he was doing a damn good job of it. It would be the first time Aizawa had ever been in a room with him when he was awake and not throwing his hands around. He's breathing different. Aizawa raised a brow at Izuku. What does that? You can't tell by how I'm breathing. Cutting him off, Yamada had shoved off his desk to stare very intensely at Izuku, who was blinking very innocently back at him. There was silence between them as Izuku held onto Aizawa's shoulder and slowly reached forward to gently pat Yamada's nose, causing him to jerk back in surprise. I win. You win. Placing a hand on his chest, Yamada narrowed his eyes. Have I been betrayed? No, you were just tricked by a 5-year-old. Aizawa slid his things into Izuku's bag before picking it and Izuku up under his arm. Are you coming or not? Of course I'm coming. Why would I rob anyone of the opportunity to spend time with the amazing present Mike? Jumping out of his chair, Yamada spun on his heels before putting one foot on a chair, Aizawa's chair to his annoyance, and pointing forward, let's go. Shota stop silently judging me. Smirking, Aizawa okay his head and let Izuku down while he walked towards the door. I'll be down in a few minutes, I need to double check some things. Nimari called out, lazily gesturing at something on the computer in front of her. We can wait. Izuku chirped as he copied Yamada's movements, minus putting his foot on the chair. Izuku waved goodbye to any remaining teacher before the three of them set off going down the stairs so that they could wait by the entrance of the building. Yamada was busy rambling about songs he wanted to use for his radio show while Izuku pretended to stomp his feet as he walked. Event. You ally that came to the bottom where Izuku asked if they could wait outside under the overhang. It was cooler outside than it had been because of rain, but it was still a reminder of summer. Dad, can you hold this? Yeah sure. Still listening to the song Yamada was talking about, Aizawa barely registered Izuku dropping the bag into his hand and bounding forward into the pouring rain. It took a second to process exactly happened, but when he did, Aizawa's gaze snapped away to see Izuku hopping from puddle to puddle. He could hear Yamada laughing next to him, previous conversation forgotten. While he calmly set down their things on the bench under the overhang and walked out to Izuku with the extra umbrella. Stopping in front of Izuku with the umbrella raised, Aizawa had to pause and take in the sight in front of him. Izuku was beaming up at him with one of the brightest smiles he had ever seen, a smile that could easily rival All Might's. He was smiling and he was soaking wet with tea. Rain still coming down heavily around him, but it was such a difference from how Izuku was yesterday that Aizawa couldn't find it in him to tell Izuku to stop and go back under the overhang. Which is why he closed the umbrella, letting himself get completely and utterly soaked. Letting out a gasp of delight, Izuku came running forward into him, hugging his leg while giving Aizawa another bright smile before hopping in circles around him, making the puddles that were forming splash about. Aizawa stood stock still. Just because he was indulging in this didn't mean he would dance in the rain. Yamada would do that for him. As if he knew Aizawa was thinking, Yamada was instantly by his side, tossing Izuku into the air and spinning him around. Izuku was practically screaming with laughter, a big contrast to Aizawa's blank face. Glancing up at the clouds, Aizawa closed his eyes while he listened to the other two running around until it was replaced by the sound of rain hitting a covering. Looking back down, he saw Nimari holding an umbrella next to him and carrying Izuku's bag. I know a lot of people think you're messy, Shota, but I don't think taking a shower rain is going to help that. Probably not. He huffed before looking down at his shoes, which by now were thoroughly soaked. Do you want your bag back? No, I left it there so it wouldn't get wet. They're probably going to get sick doing that, then sitting in an air conditioner restaurant. It's a big possibility. The two of them continued to watch as Yamada and Izuku as the rain around. Yamada at one point decided to flop down onto the ground while Izuku tried to push him upright. It lasted for a good 4 minutes until Recovery Girl came out and yelled at all of them for standing in the cold rain. Guess who's not dead? I don't even have an excuse for taking this long. Almost a year. Whoop. School was a lot more work than I thought, and I had a pretty wild year, in both school and in my personal life. LSO gotta find a way to write better maybe. Part of my problem is that I want it to be accurate and perfect to the point that whatever I write doesn't sound good to myself, and I'm constantly trying to change it. I also worry about being repetitive and that you guys might actually be getting tired of it. But thank all of you for being so supportive. Okay, that's pronounced purple. What's that one? That's the Izukun. It's a word used in English to make things flow better, but there isn't really a version we use 100% of the time to compare it to. Sue, right, the car is purple. Yeah, you got it. Aizawa could hear Yamada clapping, and when he looked over, Izuku was hiding his face in his hands, clearly embarrassed by Yamada's enthusiasm. Look at him, being such a good student and doing his summer work early, shoving the last plate towards him, even though she knew exactly where all the dishes went. Nimari leaned against the fridge. I mean, it's not like I didn't used to do my school work. But technically summer vacation hasn't started for him yet. Izu already caught up with his regular school work, there's not much else he has to do. Izuku had completely finished his makeup work halfway through term finals this week and had started most of his summer assignments soon after that. Granted, it probably helped having an entire staff of teachers who specialized in each subject that were more than willing to help him. All he really had left was his summer assignments in English, which Yamada was currently helping him with, and math, but that was enough for Izuku to do by himself anyways. He could technically do the English by himself too, but after Nimari had convinced Izuku that the English version of Present Mike was Presentation Michael, Yamada wanted to make sure Izuku was learning the correct things. Although Aizawa had a feeling Izuku knew exactly what he was saying and he was just humoring Nimari because playing pranks on Yamada was pretty funny. Adorable little shit. Nezu cleared it for him to come with you during summer training, right? Nimari had to pause and wave at Izuku when she noticed him peeking over the top of the couch. What is it this time? The mountain training camp. Yeah, he doesn't seem to mind Izuku being around. That might be an understatement considering when Aizawa had gone to get Izuku after Nezu had asked to watch him one day. He had opened the office door to see Nezu handing Izuku some fresh tea and telling him about how tiresome humanity can be sometimes while Izuku nodded mutely along. Quote, I think Izu would be okay staying with you or Yamada for a little while, but I'm not sure if he could do a whole week. That's true, I love the little broccoli child, you know I do. But in all honesty, the way he cried last time he couldn't see you still haunts me. Nimari sighed as they watched Yamada list of some verbs, emphasizing each by flicking his wrist. Broccoli child. Yes, broccoli child, have you seen his hair? PBBT whatever, he got new meds recently, right? How's he adjusting? Everything good. Aizawa tiredly ran a hand over his face. Izuku had gotten new medication, original L. Why he and Izuku's psychologist had hoped that Izuku would only need, when needed, meds for anxiety and problems sleeping, though Ito had warned him that it might take a while before symptoms start appearing. The meds for anxiety were the only ones that changed, and it was from, when needed, to daily. He seems to be doing okay, but it's only been a week. Nimari made a humming noise before pushing the fridge and coming over to the couch so she could ruffle Izuku's hair. So, are you excited to be turning 30 tomorrow, Izukun? Yeah, He's turning 5. Both Nimari and Izuku looked at Yamada and C. On Fusion and Aizawa didn't even try hiding his smile. Idiot still couldn't remember. I'm gonna be 6 tomorrow. Staring up at Yamada with wide eyes, Izuku cocked his head to the side. 6. Yamada look. Ed genuinely distressed as he reached forward and pulled Izuku into a hug. You're too small to be 6, Izuku, you have to stop growing so fast. Muffled giggles could be heard as Izuku tried to push high MSELF up so he could return the hug, but I'm not small. No. You're small and you're huggable. Squishing their faces together, Yamada blew a raspberry on Izuku's cheek before giving him another tight hug. Izuku stuck out his tongue and wiped his cheek against Yamada's jacket. Dad says I'm not small. Your dad's only saying that because he was short until his second year of. Yamada didn't get to finish as Izuku was yanked out of his arms and replaced with an ice cream bar. Aizawa was very tempted to shove it in his mouth. He was short, shorter than me, and then bam. Average size tree man. Complete hunk. Nimari plucked one of the ice creams from his hand and stuck her tongue out at him before taking a bite. Izuku leaned into his side and said a soft, "Thank you," when offered an ice cream. Before starting to nibble at it while Aizawa glared at Nimari as she flopped over the back of the couch. You're probably going to break it if you keep doing that. Shota, are you calling me fat? Oh, I'm saying you're not meant to do backflips over a couch. I think you're calling my fat. Ignoring Nimori's overdone display of hurt, Aizawa waved off Izuku, offering him a bite of his ice cream. Did you finish your homework? Yup. Bright smile and a thumbs up, and you already took a bath. MMHMM. Then you can watch the news tonight. Aizawa was really starting to wonder how Izuku managed to make it look like stars were in his eyes every time he smiled like that. Izuku didn't seem like he wanted to really do anything on his birthday. When Aizawa had asked a few days ago, he had just rubbed his shoulders before going back to his drawing. When given options, he would say anything was fine as long as Yamada and Nimari could come with them. Aizawa wasn't sure if Izuku understood that. He didn't have to choose things that other people liked. It was later decided that all of them would go to the museum, which had exhibits on some newer heroes as well as old, then lunch at a certain cafe before going to the grocery store to get ingredients for a cake. Again, Izuku didn't seem to have a preference, except red velvet because it was apparently too sweet, so they would choose whatever batter they thought was good at that time, then all 4 of them would decorate it at home. Yamada, of course, came early that morning, because missing out on Izuku's morning clinginess was apparently a travesty. He also died when he learned that Izuku didn't like raw tomatoes. They were disgusting, thank you very much, and had to have them cooked. Izuku also didn't like it when his food touched Bako. Say only certain food can touch, otherwise they don't taste right. Also understandable. Aizawa had to deal with Yamada hugging him while he cooked breakfast because he could finally say the phrase, like father like son. When Nimari arrived, the two of them clung to each other about how cute it was that both he and Izuku had the same taste in terms of food. After a while, Izuku finally came out of his room in his usual adorable sleepy haze, only to be drowned in hugs from Yamada. Happy birthday, Izuku. Yamada was probably crushing the poor kid with how tightly he was hugging him. You want to open presents now? Presents are reserved for after breakfast. Shota, don't be such a party pooper. Nimari came over and took Izuku out of Yamada's grasp and placed him on her hip, ruffling his hair gently. Happy birthday, Izu. Did you sleep well? Rubbing his face with his hands, Izuku hummed and rested his head tiredly against her shoulder while Nimari stuck her tongue out at shocked Yamada. Well, that's good. You ready for breakfast? Another hum, and Nimari carried him over to the table where Aizawa had just finished placing the dishes down. After a quick breakfast, full of laughing, giggling, and awing as Shota reminded Izuku to wipe his mouth, they all settled down in the living room, Izuku in Shota's lap, as Izuku started to shyly open his presents. Though it was probably an easy gift. Aizawa had gotten him a limited edition Silver Age All Might jacket. Izuku had mentioned once that he thought it was the coolest of All Might's hero costumes. The jacket had layered fabric instead of paint and ink that a lot of them had, so it was more durable than most. It also had a soft inside with a lining so that you couldn't feel the stitches on the inside of the jacket. Yamada had gotten him a similar gift in a sense. getting Izuku one of those insanely expensive pop-up hero books that contained some of the most iconic heroes from the start of Korix and some personal interviews with each of them, as well as specific details as to how their quirks and their hero costumes worked. Nimari had bought him a long mint green scarf with small silver stars and constellations on it. Leaning over and mentioning to Aizawa how she had noticed Aizawa's scarf was a big comfort to Izuku, but unfortunately was a part of his gear, so Aizawa couldn't just leave it with Izuku always. Hop. Fully, she said, it'll make up for when you can't give him yours. I made sure to get one long enough he could practically roll up into it and be completely covered, at least for now. The thought behind it was honestly very touching. Just the kind of surprise you'd get from her sometimes. Izuku's eyes had welled with unshed tears of happiness with each gift he was given. A few may have fallen aft. Getting through each of the gifts and giving everyone hugs and watery thank yous. He also decided that he would bring all of his gifts with him, which seemed not entirely rational considering it was summer and wearing both a jacket and scarf seemed a bit warm, but they would be inside for most of the day anyways, only being outside when walking the museum from the station. If he got hot, Aizawa would be fine with carrying some things for him. Besides, Izuku looked perfectly fine in a predominantly red jacket, mint scarf, goldenish satchel, and black rain boots. No, it wasn't supposed to rain. But Izuku said they looked like his boots, and since there wasn't any real merchandise for Aizawa, he couldn't not get them for Izuku, even though Izuku didn't even ask for them. Izuku never really asked Ed for anything, but he always had that look in his eye that said, yes, he did want it, but he was too shy to ask. The four of them took Nimori's car to the train station, Izuku in the back seat absorbed in reading his new book and sharing certain facts from it every time he found ones that were interesting, earning him head pats. He was a little sad when Aizawa said that he shouldn't bring the book with him onto the train, but quickly cheered back up when he realized he could still bring his own hero journal, which was easier to carry anyways since it fit inside his little satchel. Walking to the museum from the train station, Izuku held both Aizawa's and Yamada's hand, and every now and then they would pick him up and swing him so that Izuku could pretend to fly while Nimari took pictures. EY could honestly fill multiple books with pictures of Izuku at this point. Actually, he should probably do that. It was good to document childhood. At least Aizawa was pretty sure it was good. His ENTs had never done it, but that wasn't the point. Upon entering, the Izuku did stiffen at the amount of people there, his grip on both their hands noticeably tightening, but once they got to the first exhibit, all of the tension in his shoulders melted away. Izuku immediately got caught up in all the information presented to him, the displays, the videos, the presenters, everything caught Izuku's and not even 5 minutes in he already had his notebook out and was busy adding new notes and heroes to it, muttering the entire time he did. Aizawa could on occasion hear snippets of the new entries. Especially known for his fearlessness, Crimson Riot. Skyshot's quirk is based on caffeine consumption. Gang Orca uses training tactics similar to a drill sergeant. Because of his ability to turn his body into sand, Snatch can easily. Izu would undoubtedly ask his and probably the entire UA teaching staff's opinions on his notes. If there was one thing that could get Izuku to push past his shynesses, it was the need for accuracy and to know more. And of course, the biggest excitement came when they got to the brand new All Might exhibit, full of displays and information from the #1 heroes start to current day. Hero costumes, most famous achievements, a list of some of the most heinous villains All Might had taken down, everything was there in the Grand Wing, all dedicated to him. Of course, exhibit was predominantly why most of the people were there that day, so at one point Aizawa had picked up Izuku and placed him on his shoulders so that Izu could get a better view of everything. But that only meant he could feel Izu literally rocking back and forth with excitement, and more than once he had to reach up and hold Izuku's hand to make sure he didn't fall off. Aizawa was glad things were going well. Or at least they were, until almost most of the way through he felt Izuku freeze. Glancing up, he saw Izuku staring wide-eyed and paralyzed off at one of the displays, and before he could even ask what was wrong, tears had already started to run down Izuku's face. Taking Izuku down from his shoulders, Aizawa quickly pulled him into his chest and began to run his hands through Izuku's hair while he gently bounced him up and down, all the while searching for whatever could have caused this reaction. As far as he could tell there wasn't anything, a hologer. Am of All Might talking about the characteristics of a good hero, an old video of the #1 hero saving hundreds of people with his signature grin and catchphrase. Maybe it was the crowd starting to get at Izuku. No, that wasn't it. Izuku always told him when he felt overwhelmed by the amount of people in a room. A sharp gasp tore Aizawa away from his search and back to Izuku. Izuku, it's alright, it okay. Aizawa softly murmured before placing a small peck on his forehead and tightening his grip around him. Can you tell me what's wrong? Shaking his head, Izuku began to aggressively whip at his eyes. Obviously upset with his own reaction, and Aizawa had to pull his hands away before Izuku hurt himself. Shota. Turning around, Aizawa saw Nimari standing behind him with a look of concern that shifted to sadness when she noticed Izuku shaking slightly in his arms. I'm going to take him someplace quieter, probably the lobby. I'll go find Yamada. Nimari waved her hand off to the right of her. Somewhere here. Putting her hand on his shoulder and giving him a reassuring squeeze, Nimari went off while Aizawa pushed through the crowd to get back to the entrance, the whole time humming and gently reassuring Izuku until he finally stopped shaking. After getting to the lobby, he had found a chair near a window that overlooked the courtyard that was slightly secluded by some plants. Brushing the hair out of Izuku's face, Aizawa tried to get him to look up, but Izuku held his gaze firmly downwards towards Aizawa's chest. Feeling a little better. A small nod and another run in his eyes. Can you tell me what happened? Isuzu bit his lip and looked like he was going to clam up like he did sometimes, but then Izuku spoke up. My mom used to play that video for me. That video. Aizawa thought of all the videos they had seen before. Remember the last one he had glanced at before leaving the exhibit with Izuku, the one where All Might saved all those people in minutes. Another small nod. We'd watch it all the time. Sometimes she'd play it when I was really sad. Sighing, Aizawa let his gaze drift up to the ceiling. I'm sorry, Izu. He felt Izuku shift in his lap before Izuku rested his head against his shoulder and shook his head. After a moment of silence that was only interrupted by an occasional sniffle from Izuku, Aizawa spoke again. Do you want to eat at lunch when Nimari and Yamada get here? We can come back to the museum another day if you want. It took Izuku a moment to respond, but when he did, he finally looked back up at Aizawa. The place with all the cats. Like the one Kayama Oba-san said. Aizawa huffed. Yeah, that one. We can play with cats too. Smiling softly, Aizawa brushed away any stray tears on Izuku's face. You can play with all the cats, kiddo. The cafe Aizawa had chosen was a specialty cat cafe that he had visited constantly during school and after he had graduated. It had been a nice place for him when he went to UA to help distress. And he was hoping that it would be the same for Izu, seeing as how he seemed to share Aizawa's love for cats. Though Izu basically loved most animals. The cafe had a pastel color scheme with lavender, pink, blue and white as the main colors, and soft yellow stars and moons painted across the walls. Multiple cubby holes of different sizes and patterns lined the back wall above booths, and towers that went up to the ceiling. Tables were scattered around, and more importantly, there were cats everywhere. There were cats of multiple different breeds and colors, calicos resting in some of the cubby holes. A Siamese playing with a feather attached to a scratching post, some bobtails playing with each other, to name a few. Izuku had been enamored by the bobtails and immediately pointed them out to Aizawa. So he sent Izu over to play with them while he ordered. With every cat Izuku played with, he would sit on the floor in front of the cat, then hold out his hand and patiently wait for the cat to come to him before playing with it. Each time one of them would brush Izu's hand, he'd look back at the three pro heroes with such amazement before going back to playing with cats. By the time the food had come out, Izuku had probably played with a third of the cats in the cafe, carrying one over a tuxedo one and putting it in his lap so that he could still pet it while he ate, and by the end of the meal, Izuku had at least 4 sleeping around him while Izuku himself was starting to doze. The sight honestly had Aizawa considering getting a cat. Pets were known to help with anxiety, and even though his apartment didn't allow animals, exceptions could be made for therapy ones. The rule against pets was probably one of the only reasons he didn't have a cat in the first place, besides almost never being home. But the whole discussion of getting a cat would have to wait until after summer training. There was no way he would bring an animal on the trip, so best to wait until after. When it was time to leave, Izuku said goodbye to each cat he had played with and gave each either a pat on the head or a hug before taking Aizawa and Nomori's hand as they walked to the store. Nimori had said it was only fair that she got to hold Izuku's hand this time, since Yamada had held it on the way to the museum, and she couldn't hold it when they went to the cafe. At the store, they decided that cupcakes would be a better option for decorating since they could each decorate their own, and they got plenty of different icings, colors, tools, and decorations for the maximum amount of fun decorating. Which sounded like a blatant excuse for Yamada and Nimori to get more than what they actually needed, because Aizawa pretty sure they didn't need a powdered sugar mesh shaker. But arguing with Nimori was a losing battle. Plus it was funny watching Yamada pout when Nimori got her way and he didn't get his. Aizawa carried Izuku on his hip on the way home while Izuku held on to one bag and everyone else carried the rest. During the train trip, Izuku would pull out one of the icings out of the bag and show it to Aizawa, silently asking his opinion before taking out the next color. He was pretty sure Izuku was trying to see what he liked so that Izu could make a cupcake for him, which was sweet of the little brat. Getting back to the apartment, Aizawa led Izuku down and got out the bowls and pans they would need, and Izuku got his new pop-up book out again and was reading a section of it to Nimori when Aizawa felt his phone buzz. Pulling it out of his back pocket, he saw that it was a call from Goda. Yamada looked over his shoulder, trying to read who the caller it was. "Ooh, who's that?" "Someone important. I can handle cooking if you need to take it." Taking a bowl from the counter and twirling, Yamada struck a pose and looked at Aizawa with sparkling eyes. "Nimori, please help Izuku make the cupcake batter." Aye, Captain." "Hey, just because I burned a baking thing once doesn't mean I can't do it at all. Better safe than sorry." Shrugging and walking away as Yamada tried to defend his non-existent cooking skills, Aizawa ruffled Izuku's hair before taking the call inside his room. "Hello, Goda, how are you?" "Hi, I'm fine, thank you for asking. It's been a while and I'm sorry to bother you, but I just remembered that it was Izuku's birthday. And I was hoping to wish him happy birthday. I'm sure he'll appreciate that, thank you." Aizawa breathed a laugh. "He's in the other room, I can give the phone to him." "That'd be great, thank you." Aizawa opened the door to find Izuku trying to pour the bag of cupcake mix very slowly into a bowl with intense focus and his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in concentration while Yamada had turned over a pot and was starting to make a drum roll, and Nimori waved two tissues in each hand as makeshift pom-pom to cheer Izuku on. "Why are the two of you like this? Thanks for watching.